Now come to the second Opposition Day motion in the name of the Leader of the Opposition. To move the motion, Mr Christopher Leslie.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move the motion that stands in my name and those of my honourable and right honourable friends. Madam Deputy Speaker, the productivity of our economy, of businesses, of the workforce, of the resources of our country are critical for our recovery and for the future of our prosperity, and there should be a cross-party consensus that productivity is the key challenge facing Britain today. Which is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was very disappointed by the Chancellor's attitude at Treasury questions yesterday and his point-blank refusal to engage with this crucial debate in the House of Commons today. Now, we've learned, Madam Deputy Speaker, that when it comes to this Chancellor, when it comes to dealing with issues that he doesn't really want to attend to, he either blames someone else or he sends someone else. And so in that growing tradition, can I today welcome the new Chief Secretary to the Treasury to his new role. Will I give way? Of course I'll give way. How could I not?
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, but surely he must admit that yesterday, with the Chancellor here at Treasury questions able to answer questions of productivity, and again as First Secretary here for Prime Minister's questions able to answer again questions on productivity, that's quite a good availability of the Chancellor of the Exchequer in this House to answer questions.
I'm sure that the Chancellor is very much focused on being the Prime Minister in waiting. He is, of course, the eminent First Secretary of State, and I hope that his junior ministers manage to occasionally peek around his door, maybe get the odd minute of his very busy time on these questions. But personally, I think it would have been the mark. I'll give way in a moment. I think it would have been the mark of a Chancellor focused on our current economic challenges to engage a bit more thoughtfully in how best we tackle Britain's productivity problems. But of course we know that he couldn't even bring himself to mention productivity once during the course of his 8,000-word budget speech just 3 months ago. Yes, I'll give way.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman is being a little churlish. I'm sure we can all be accused of all sorts of things. But over the last 5.5 years, my right honourable friend has focused with exocet precision on making the economy grow, increase jobs, and to get us on the move again. This churlishness belies the honourable gentleman.
I'm very sorry. He finds that a little bit churlish. When did the honourable gentleman last speak to the Chancellor about productivity? I'll give way.
This morning. Clearly the honourable gentleman is not a barrister. One should never ask a question that you don't know the answer to. Last Thursday in the lobby.
I'm delighted. I only wish the Chancellor would come and talk to the rest of us about productivity, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Just for the record and for the avoidance of doubt, it is not normal practice, though I'll forgive the honourable gentleman on this one occasion, for the performer at the dispatch box to ask questions of the other side of that bench. Just in case anyone who is new to the order, in case anyone who is new to the House thinks this is the way we do things, it is not. But on this occasion, I will allow some leniency. Mr. Chris Leslie.
Very much for that sage advice, Madam Deputy Speaker. I suspect that the Chancellor will be forced to address the question of productivity in the forthcoming emergency budget that we get on July the 8th. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, let's just dwell for a moment on why productivity matters. As I say, well, I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Give way, because I think he's being a little unfair on the Chancellor. Because I've asked the Chancellor several times about productivity, and he hasn't got any answers. That's the truth of the matter. Time and time again on these benches, we've asked the question, he does not know the answer because productivity is flatlining.
Yeah. That's why I think it is so appalling the Chancellor couldn't be bothered to mention it in that budget speech back in March. It should be at the top of the agenda of all of the Treasury teams and all of the government departments. I'll give way in a moment to the honourable gentleman, who I know will have plenty to contribute on this issue. Our economic prosperity depends on maximising the amount of output from the efforts of working people and the resources that are available to business. The amount of output per hour worked is a useful way for us to measure whether our economy is advancing and adding value, or whether we are just treading water. Creating a more productive economy means creating a virtuous cycle of higher growth, higher living standards, and as a consequence, more effective deficit reduction. When working people can produce more and have the tools and the skills to create output more efficiently, employers can then afford to pay them more, tax revenues become more buoyant, and our GDP can grow in a more sustainable way. I'll give way to my friend after I've given way to the honourable gentleman.
Way. He's absolutely right. Productivity is something which is incredibly important, and the Treasury Select Committee and economists have been banging on ad nauseam about this for certainly 5 years that I've been a Member of Parliament. I'm just wondering why it's only in the last 6 months that he's picked it up himself on the cost of living.
Well, I will send him the anthology of Chris Leslie's speeches. I'm sure he'll be keen to know. At every occasion, 2013, 2014, 2015, I've been talking about productivity too for a very long period of time. And I think it is important that we don't just think that this is a parliamentary issue. The CBI have been emphasising the importance of higher productivity as the only way to secure long-term sustainable wage growth. In the words of the Governor of the Bank of England, productivity growth, doing more with less, is the key determinant of income growth. Our shared prosperity depends on it. And of course, as Paul Krugman famously put it, productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it is almost everything. So we do need a cross-party approach to this challenge. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and of course the Chancellor is always very keen to make economic comparisons with the United Kingdom economy and G7 counterparts. But isn't it the case that the UK output per hour in comparison with the G7 shows that we are 17% below the G7 average and a huge 31% below the USA average? Isn't that the root cause of this problem?
I think the problem is particularly stark when you make those international comparisons. Our productivity growth rate has plummeted to the second worst in the G7 today. The UK was ranked 29th out of 36 OECD countries for GDP growth between 2010 and 2014. And so my honourable friend makes a very, very important point. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Surely you can take that argument further when we talk about productivity, because it's not a new debate, it's been a debate that's gone on for many, many years now. But you've not necessarily got to look at an hourly productivity. What you've got to do is give the individual who produces the equipment and the research to do the job. That's how you increase productivity, when you break it all down.
Investment in new production process technologies, making sure that we have the machinery, the capital equipment, as my honourable friend says, is so incredibly important. And that's why I think I'll be turning to the issues of business investment, how we can incentivise that. Those, I think, are some of the challenges that we've got to make sure that the Chancellor does address. I know he's got his emergency budget, he's got his own political priorities he wants to put first, but I think that ultimately is the key. I'll give way in a moment, but the honourable gentleman was on his feet first, and I wouldn't want to, pick the honourable gentleman before him.
Chancellor for giving way. He talked about productivity and the need to invest in plant and machinery, and the need for cross-chamber support to improve our productivity. So, will he support the Conservative government's maintenance or increase of capital allowances for business, which gives them a clear incentive to invest in their businesses?
We have, on this side, consistently supported proper and sustained capital allowances for business investment. It was, I think, one of the errors of the last Parliament for the Chancellor to reduce them so rapidly before he then saw the error of his way and return them to the level at which they are now. But that chopping and changing, that sort of stop-start approach, is really anathema to good, proper, long-term business planning. Madam Deputy Speaker, you wouldn't know it from the Chancellor's complacency, but UK economic productivity is stuck in the slow lane. The stagnation of productivity growth is, in the words of the ONS, unprecedented in post-war Britain. Earlier this month, I'll give way in a moment. Earlier this month, the OECD said that weak labour productivity remained a problem and that sustainable economic expansion and further progress in living standards rests on boosting productivity growth. And the Bank of England have also emphasised the extremely and uncharacteristically weak growth in UK productivity, and that there is still great uncertainty about how productivity might evolve and how this could affect the economy. I'll give way to my honourable friend first and then...
Thank you for giving way. I wondered whether or not you could tell us why you think productivity has been so stagnant for the past 3 years in particular.
Well, I think that the evidence is very clear that we have had persistently poor productivity in recent years. And I think that I'll be coming in a moment to talk about the impact of government investment, of infrastructure, of tackling the skills challenge that we have to have, which I think have been kicked very much into the long grass in recent years, and it's not good enough. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, and may I commend him, actually, for introducing this debate, which I think is an important subject. But would he accept that in certain areas and segments, such as car manufacturing in the United Kingdom, productivity is high? In Nissan, for example, productivity is as high as it is in any car manufacturer in Europe. And will he applaud this government's proposals to have 3 million apprentices? Because Nissan and other manufacturers accept that it is through the apprenticeship scheme that productivity will be raised.
Yeah, good question.
I think it is important to recognise that the productivity problems are not all the same across every single sector. Some sectors are managing to break through and making a difference, perhaps relative to other sectors in other parts of the world. And it is important that we do focus on apprenticeships and skills, but the quality of those apprenticeships is really key as well. And I'll be talking a little bit more about skills. We've just had that, of course, as the Opposition Day debate as well. I'll make a little bit of progress before I give way. Well, my honourable friend is so persuasive.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend.
And he's big as well.
Indeed. I'm just curious, Madam Deputy Speaker, that some apprenticeships are undoubtedly very good, but I'm also aware of some in the North Staffordshire and wider area where they are little more than YTS rebranded, where people come in, work for a period of time, slave labour exploited almost, and then kicked out and the next batch of apprentices brought in. So there are some very good apprentices, but there are some apprenticeships that are quite frankly scandalous.
That's right.
So I would agree that we need far better scrutiny on the nature of apprenticeships and the nature of skills and training. I think sometimes we just have this blanket approach that says, oh, well, all schemes or all tax incentives are all the same, and then we leave it, this is the classic Whitehall problem, that we don't actually go into detail and think, well, how are these adding value and how is the quality part of those? So I would personally advocate a better look at the quality of those particular investments. I ought to give way to the honourable gentleman, and I will do so.
Right on.
Right on.
Very grateful, and this is a very important debate, and I think we can learn together on how we can do better. Over the 13 years of Labour government, there was practically no productivity gain whatsoever throughout the whole public service. Why was that, and what can we learn from that?
Well, normally I have a lot of respect for the honourable gentleman, but on this I'm afraid his facts are wrong. Under the last Labour government, we had a period of sustained productivity growth. In fact, between 1990... did I hear something there? When it comes to private sector productivity, we had a sustained period of growth. And I think we can talk about public sector productivity, but I'm in particular focusing about the wider economic private sector productivity, which I think ultimately is the way we create wealth, is the way that we create prosperity in this country. And I'm very proud of what the last Labour government did, because between 1997 and the period just before the global financial crisis, productivity grew by an average of 2.2% a year, and in fact it reached 4.2% in 2003. At the time, the UK's productivity was second only to the United States. And the CBI themselves have emphasised that in that particular decade, improvements in labour productivity accounted for almost 3/4 of UK economic growth. Over this period, real wages rose faster in the UK than in other advanced economies, and rising productivity and GDP growth also meant that the last Labour government was able to take significant steps tackling poverty, making those improvements improvements in our public services. That was not by accident, Madam Deputy Speaker. It was by design, and we achieved that sustainable growth in productivity because of relentless efforts to focus on competition, innovation, investment, skills and enterprise, a 10-year framework for science and innovation, incentives for investment in business and research and development, the expansion of higher education and adult and vocational training. That was the record of the last Labour government. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Would he also accept that employers have a big role to play in this, and the appetite for low-paid, unskilled employees has added to this, and that really employers must value workers much more, invest in them and be prepared to pay them wages, which means that it's worthwhile investing in them too?
There is indeed a problem of the shift away from that added value, higher skilled economy that we have to have in order to maintain and indeed win that famous global race. And if we think that we can do that simply by chasing lower wage, lower skill markets, then we will never ultimately succeed in relative to those other countries. The OBR's, I'll make a little bit of progress if I may, and then I'll give way to other honourable members. The OBR's recent forecasts have lamented the persistent weakness of our recent productivity. Indeed, according to the OBR, if our productivity growth per worker was closer to 4%, our national debt would be £350 billion lower by the end of this Parliament. Now, these are big numbers, but that's £5,000 less debt for each person in this country. So this productivity issue is absolutely crucial, and it links across to the health of our public finances. If it translated into potential GDP, it would mean growth of 3.7% by 2019-20. That's the sort of growth that we need in this country. But the OBR, I think, are right to warn that improvements in growth and living standards do depend very much on our productivity performance, and they're right to say that it's the most important and uncertain part of their economic forecasts. Quite simply, if sustainable productivity growth fails to materialise, the Chancellor will just continue to miss his deficit reduction targets, however hard he may try to distract with his dreams about permanent surpluses. So while productivity does traditionally drop off during a recession, here we are today, 7 years after the global banking crisis, and our productivity is still 1.7% below that pre-crisis peak, a whopping 16% below the level implied by that pre-crisis trend. Last year, productivity growth just 0.2%. The year before, 2013, it was negative, minus 0.3. The year before that, 2012, minus 1.2%. That's just not good enough. I will, because he's been so persistent.
The gentleman is extremely kind. The figure that the honourable gentleman hasn't mentioned, of course, is the productivity figure for 2009, the last year that Labour were in government. And in that year, it dropped by a staggering 2.6%, the highest for the last 25 years.
Yeah. And I know this is a shock to the honourable gentleman. I'm not sure where he was at the time. There was a global banking crisis, and it created difficulties. I know it's a shock. It's a shock to honourable members. In their script, it's been expunged from the record. It's as though it never happened. I'll give way to the honourable
gentleman for giving way. And he's making a very good speech. Would he also agree that the culture of long working hours is actually often the enemy of productivity? And the textbook example was maybe Volkswagen 10, 20 years ago when they cut the working week from 35 to 28 hours and found that productivity went up. When workers feel they don't have all day to do the job, they get on with the job and productivity rises.
I think there is a case to be made for making sure that we also focus on the morale of those in employment, and there is a point, a sort of optimal point at which that morale can fall and can dip, and we have to focus very much on what it is that creates the optimal circumstances for those in work to actually be able to produce the amounts that our economy needs. And that's all part of this complicated picture. The Chancellor in the past, when we've managed to get him to talk about productivity, referred to a productivity puzzle. Well, if we were looking for clues to what the solution might be to that puzzle, I think looking more closely at the nature of our economic recovery, the way it, I think, is feeling quite a little bit stressed still quite fraught and fragile, I think that is part of the solution here. On skills, and we've been talking about this already in the debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, just a few weeks ago, the ONS published their analysis and showed that the share of high-skilled jobs in the economy is actually falling relative to the share of low-skilled work, which of course is taking its place. And the Bank of England's last inflation report also stated that since mid-2013, employment growth has been more concentrated in lower-skilled occupations, concluding that this shift in the composition of the labour force could have dragged on aggregate productivity growth over the past 2 years. I'll make a little progress if I may. I don't think this is something that we just need to accept. I don't think that we're just at the mercy of events, unable to influence our economic productivity. On this side of the House, we believe it doesn't have to be this way, and I think history does show that Britain can do better than this. I think that in contrast to the Conservative traditional approach, which is just to step back and hope that productivity sort of magically springs from the market, from thin air, we take a very different view. We believe that decent infrastructure, decent public services can support business growth, motorways that flow freely and trains that commuters can actually get on, tax offices that answer business queries efficiently rather than keeping their company staff always on hold, employees who are off sick, who are able to get treated swiftly in a decent NHS. That's all part of the productivity story. An education system that supports a workforce with higher quality skills. So many aspects of our public services are crucial for our future economic productivity, and each of these depends on the Chancellor making the right fiscal choices for this Parliament. This should have been at the top of the Chancellor's agenda throughout the last Parliament, but for him to not even mention it in the last budget speech was a grievous error. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
To the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. It's important to look at the facts. Earlier, the Honourable Gentleman quoted the ONS. Does he agree when the ONS talked about the oil and the financial services industries, and when they said, together, these two industry groupings account for the majority of the fall in productivity since Q1 2008?
As I said to the Honourable Gentleman earlier, there are different sectors that are facing different productivity challenges, but I think ultimately, if we think that this is just something in one or two sectors, we would be wrong. We have to address this forensically and make sure that we look from sector to sector and address that properly in a mature, evidence-led way. And that is what I think we need to do. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm conscious lots of other honourable members want to come in because they believe that productivity is an important topic, and for that I respect them. But I have to say, it is important that we don't let this issue pass without seeing the connection between the health of our public finances and the productivity. I'll make a little bit of progress, if I may. We still have a £75 billion deficit in this country, and I think I'd like the Minister, the new Chief Secretary, to at least acknowledge in his response to this debate the truth that stronger productivity is crucial for repairing the public finances. We do need sensible savings across non-protected departments to reduce levels of public expenditure. But if the Chancellor makes the wrong fiscal choices in the forthcoming emergency budget, he could make the situation far worse. There is a hard-headed business case for protecting and prioritising those services which enhance investment, skills and innovation. That is the responsible fiscal approach that the Chancellor should take. Productivity should not be adversely affected by his fiscal choices. So that's the point that I hope the Chancellor will understand. And whether he does, whether he can see through his political ambitions into the economic consequences of the decisions he takes, those are the important issues. Now, I've written to Robert Choate, the Director of the Office for Budget Responsibility, to see if we can make some progress, again, working cross-party, to try and get a better evidence-led approach to the impact of those choices that the Chancellor faces on productivity and on the levels of public investment. I think that an OBR review would acknowledge the centrality of the productivity challenge, and it would help make the right choices for the country. It would be better to have that evidence-led understanding of the consequences of alternative fiscal choices. Just the last couple of points, but I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman first.
Anyway, I think when the member for Thirsk intervened on him and mentioned the oil industry, which has become significantly less material to the national accounts, and which is a massively productive industry in terms of value added for numbers of people, he didn't really answer that question properly. The facts are that one of the productivity challenges that we've had has been the significant relative demise of the oil industry, and he shouldn't use words like forensic without recognising that.
Well, as one industry declines, others will have to fill the gap available. I think it's also important to recognise that there are multiple aspects of energy activity and energy markets that are coming on stream, and we need to make sure that we develop those and exploit new opportunities for our country, for energy security and for our future economic prosperity. I really must make a little bit of progress because I know that, well, the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm very grateful. My honourable friend has been extremely generous with his time. But one of the areas that I was hoping my friend might touch on is the issue around the workers themselves, in the sense of, if you're on a zero-hour contract, if you've seen your salaries driven down to minimum wage levels, if you're having to supply your own uniform, or indeed if you're an agency worker that you don't know from one day to the next what you're going to be doing, where you're going to be doing it, is it any wonder that your productivity is going to be depressed?
That is absolutely a crucial point. And I think a far healthier environment is one in which the workforce feel valued, feel as though they have a stake in the output, not just in terms of wages, but perhaps as partners in the company and partners in the firm. Those are the sorts of discussions we have to have about the sort of economy in the long term that we must have. But the Chancellor, Madam Deputy Speaker, is facing now a fork in the road, and this is very relevant for the budget, the emergency budget, as it approaches on the 8th of July. Will he take an ideological approach to public services and public investment? Or will he join a consensus that productivity, growth, living standards should be at the heart of those budget choices? Get into here now some practical options that are open to the Chancellor if he is serious about boosting productivity. We've got to have further reform of incentives to encourage research and development, support scientific discovery, underpin long-term financial backing for projects which don't necessarily always yield near-term returns. We need to break the politicking around infrastructure, flush through the pipeline of stalled projects, and ministers should feel free to steal the idea of a more independent, evidence-led approach to infrastructure prioritisation, as advocated so eloquently by Sir John Armitt in his report for us before the election. We need to sweat the authorisations already voted for by Parliament to underwrite infrastructure development with government-backed guarantees, so woefully underutilised at present. We need skills and training to flourish and not fall victim to short-term and ill-thought-through budget decisions driven by a political timetable. We need serious action on housing supply to help working people with the choices they face in work and to support new employment opportunities as they arise. And we need clarity that now that local enterprise partnerships will get immediate devolved powers required to unlock local growth, not political delays because the Chancellor takes exception to one particular form of local governance arrangement. We need an early decision in response to the Davies Commission report on airport capacity. It's due imminently. Government ministers are already starting to kick it into the long grass. Apparently, they're only going to address this vital question at the end of this year at the earliest. And we need real announcements in short order on specific rail interconnectivity between towns and cities. I'd like to finish my remarks as follows. These are just some of the urgent priorities that deserve urgent attention at the top of the government. Will the Chief Secretary shed some light today on the thinking of his great, glorious leader, the first Secretary of State? Or do we have to wait for this agenda to fit into a Downing Street soundbite before it actually gets any attention? I do genuinely wish the Chief Secretary luck in gaining favour with the Prime Minister in waiting, because right now we have a Chancellor distracted by his political ambitions, who can't even be bothered to debate on productivity, let alone remember to mention productivity in his budget speech. Britain cannot afford for this issue to be neglected any longer, and on this side of the House, we'll keep reminding the Chancellor when he's here of his responsibilities until real action is taken.
Order. The question is, as on the order paper, Mr. Greg Hands.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm delighted to be responding to this debate today on productivity, because it is something which is absolutely central to our long-term plan for fixing the economy. My ministerial colleagues in the Treasury have been candid about the scale of the productivity challenge, so in some ways I agree with a great deal of what the Honourable Gentleman opposite has been saying. But this is a challenge that the UK has faced for decades, not several years as the motion suggests. And we have been very clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that raising productivity is a key challenge in this Parliament for this government and will be a key focus for us over the next 5 years. And indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, I noted the Chancellor noted our relatively low productivity very early on in the last government as a drag to economic recovery, as early as August 2010, when he spoke at Bloomberg about the economy of the future. And the Honourable Gentleman said it wasn't mentioned during the budget. Well, I just refer him to page 1 of the budget document, on the very first page. And I will say, no, I'm going to tell him, first of all, what page 1 said. The deficit remains too high and productivity too low. There are still long-standing structural weaknesses in the economy, and the gap between the economic performance of London and the rest of the UK remains too wide. I give way to him.
The key word there is the difference between the budget document and the budget speech. I think the budget speech was over an hour long, and I don't know why the Chancellor didn't mention that very paragraph in his budget speech. Why didn't he do that?
Well, I thank you for that intervention, but surely the most important thing is actually what is the delivery in the budget, not just the speech. And the delivery of the budget was all about things like digital communications infrastructure, housing, science, innovation, freezing fuel duty, doing something for the oil and gas regime, sharing economy, backing business by launching a comprehensive review of business rates. That is the most important thing in government, is what is delivered. And it was 4 weeks ago, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Chancellor announced, way before any motion or article by the Honourable Gentleman, that we will be publishing a productivity plan, a plan to make Britain work better. And I'll remind the Honourable Gentleman of the speech, Madam Deputy Speaker, because he was there. He was actually there, I think, with various of the Labour leadership contenders. I must say, minus the member for Islington North, who I think was curiously seemed to be missed off the CBI invitation list, but he may be up for an invitation in the future. But this is what he said. This is what the Chancellor said at the speech. Let me be clear. Perhaps not clear enough for the Honourable Gentleman. Improving the productivity of our country is the route to raising standards of living for everyone in the country. And I'm sure that the Shadow Chancellor will recall this, because he was there as well. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, speaks volumes that the ministerial team announced by the Prime Minister in May for the Treasury, I'll give way in a little bit, includes Jim O'Neill, one of the most respected economists in the country, and an authority on productivity. His input, so it's more deeds rather than words, his input will be vital as we put in place the policies which will turbocharge our economy. Our productivity plan will build on the significant supply-side reforms that we have put in place over the last 5 years. It will be wide-ranging and ambitious and look to the long term. It will help rebalance the economy and build the northern powerhouse. To improve our infrastructure, to reduce burdens on businesses, to increase our support for childcare, to ensure many more affordable homes are built, to expand apprenticeships and equip us with the skills we need for the 21st century, and mark a bold next step in this country's remarkable economic recovery. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the Chief Secretary for giving way. Can he confirm whether his productivity plan will be assessed by the Office for Budget Responsibility as to its success or otherwise? And can he also perhaps mention whether it will be cross-cutting across all government departments to make sure that some of the regional imbalances that he's mentioned already will be tackled across government?
Well, the gentleman raises an important point about the OBR, and of course the OBR look at all government proposals at different times at the appropriate time. So I don't think there will be any exception to this. I give way to my honourable friend, my right honourable friend.
Very grateful. Does the Chief Secretary recall that Labour took into public ownership Network Rail, a crucial industry for our country, and that the last government commissioned the McNulty report, which discovered that that big organisation was way behind its continental comparators in terms of productivity and efficiency, and that their system of managing it had fallen very short? And is it something he can help remedy?
I thank my right honourable friend for his intervention. I think infrastructure will be a key part of the productivity plan and studying which are the productive areas of our infrastructure and which are perhaps the less productive areas of our infrastructure. I will give way, yes.
I'm grateful to the Chief Secretary for giving way. Will he agree with me that productivity, of course, is absolutely vital for the British economy, and the way that we achieve good productivity in this country is through having a strong economy, so having a pro-enterprise, low taxation, low regulation economy, as opposed to that by the opposite party?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend is quite right. It seems to me still that Labour are not learning the lessons of the general election only about 5 weeks ago today. The enterprise, the value of sound public finances, dealing with your deficit are extremely important, so I entirely agree with my honourable friend. I give way, yes.
I thank the First Secretary for giving way. At least twice during his opening address, the Shadow Chancellor said that what we're actually seeing now is highly skilled employees being replaced by low-skilled employees. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the Shadow Chancellor should not talk himself down like that?
I think my honourable friend makes his point in his usual way. All I can say, yes, he is here. Unlike half of the Shadow Treasury team who went into the election, who were wiped out either by the Conservatives or by the SNP, including his leader. I will get on with it. I thank you for that information. But I thought, Madam Deputy Speaker, we start off by being helpful to set out the productivity question in relation to the UK's general economic competitiveness, if you like, setting the scene of the problem that we face. I'm going to make some progress first. I think I've awakened his interest by the mention of the SNP. Honourable members will, of course, be aware that thanks to our long-term economic plan, we can be proud of having the highest growth of the major advanced countries' economies in 2014 and predicted to repeat that in 2050. We are actually highly competitive, and actually this is linked to productivity. We're ranked 9th out of 144 countries globally for competitiveness. We enjoy the lowest corporation tax in the G7. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are seen as being well governed in the top 20 out of 102 countries for all 8 factors the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index 2015. London remains a world-leading international financial centre. British universities are by far the best in the world outside the US. And for those who complain that we no longer make things, well, within 2 years we're expected to see the UK all-time car production record matched, which was set back in the 1970s. And the city of Sunderland, Madam Deputy Speaker, now produces more cars than the whole of Italy put together. So we are extremely competitive. I will allow it. Yes.
On that point, the Chief Secretary, is he aware that the spend in value in the value chain in British automotive products is only 30% of the total spend, 37%. That 2/3 of the entire spend in the value chain in British automotive products is imported, and that the actual productivity, high productivity in British automotive products is actually an optical illusion of the imported content of those cars, most of which comes from Europe, the Europe that you're trying to take us out of.
I think it's being a little bit churlish, Madam Deputy Speaker, to debate the precise details of that. The facts remain that car production in this country is extremely impressive. Very impressive indeed, and I think we should celebrate that right the way throughout the UK, including in Scotland as well. So let me make a little bit of progress first. But all of this is very good, but we need to be equally honest, Madam Deputy Speaker, about the areas where we can do better. On skills, our literacy and numeracy need to be improved, and our OECD position for intermediate skills needs to rise. On female participation in the workforce, matching the highest rate of female participation in the G7, Canada, or the G20, or the OECD, Iceland, would mean over 500,000 and 2.5 million more women entering the labour force, respectively. And our gross value-added growth is still too reliant on London and the South East. We're not building enough housing, and our investment in roads and rails hasn't yet undone the effects of the decades in which we underinvested. And all this, frankly, means that our economy still needs to find an extra gear. And I should say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we should view this within the context of broad decreases in productivity growth across the OECD in the past few years. So we are not unique in this regard. Other G7 countries, including Germany and Italy, have seen their measured productivity per worker fall since 2007. So we have to accept that productivity is a major challenge facing us, but it is not a new challenge, and it has been around for some decades. And to meet that challenge, we should look calmly and seriously at the variety of factors which affect productivity and put in place wide, ambitious, long-term reforms as well. And importantly, and this is what I think the Honourable Gentleman needs to engage on, these reforms cannot jeopardise the other elements of our economic growth. And that is the approach that this government will take in our productivity plan. Because productivity itself is not an end in itself, it is a means to an end. It is all about prosperity. So I hope, Madam Deputy Speaker, when we publish our productivity plan, the party opposite will see fit to support it, because we agree that improved productivity will be good for living standards across the country and good for meeting our fiscal commitments, which I think was a point that he raised. I'll allow him, yes.
I just don't think this meets the reality of what's been happening for the last 7 years. We know that productivity in the UK has fallen. The government has failed in delivering prosperity. But the real root of that has been the failure of macroeconomic policy. Your big idea was quantitative easing, 375 billion of new assets created. None of that has fed through to bank lending. That's the reason that we haven't seen the underlying investment in our economy, and you need to address that and make sure that we see an investment in our infrastructure in this country, industrial investment, a plan for the future of growth, and not some meaningless productivity plan, hot air and words, but no reality.
Before the Chief Secretary answers that point of order, I'm not referring only to the honourable gentleman who's just spoken, but several people this afternoon have used the word you. When in this chamber one uses the word you, it refers to the chair. And I have not done any of the things I've been accused of this afternoon, I promise you. I don't want to pick on individual members at this early stage in this Parliament, but please let us just use the correct language. Minister.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to dispute actually the premise of his question, because productivity is rising in this country. Albeit at a relatively, we'd like to see it higher. It's 0.9% of this year. The OBR is projecting productivity increasing in the coming years by between 2.1 and 2.5% per annum. We need it to increase even more than that, but it certainly is not the case that productivity has collapsed in the last couple of years. OK, I hear it. And to answer a point raised about the OBR, which the Honourable Gentleman said, the OBR, as I said, already produces forecasts and commentary on productivity and will continue to do so independently and impartially as it always has done. Let me just ask him, OK, yes.
The point I think that we're looking for his support on is that the OBR be commissioned to look at the spending choices that the Chancellor has before him, because he will have to acknowledge that certain decisions on reducing public expenditure could have more of an effect, adverse effect on productivity than others. And it's making sure that we have a proper analysis about the impact of those decisions. That would be a better, more sensible way to think about how we spend, and it's not just a debate about how much we spend.
I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think the OBR remit is pretty clear on this kind of thing. But can I just say, I've listened to the Honourable Gentleman a great deal in the last 5 years, and coming from a party which never set up the OBR or any equivalent to the OBR, he seems to be now rather sort of over-fascinated in how the operations of the OBR should be. And I just think that perhaps we might have thought of some of these questions during the 13 years of Labour government. Let me just answer some of his points about, I think he said that employment growth has been of poor quality, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would dispute that. I think we will find in the 5 years since the first quarter 2010, the 5 years of the last government, more than 60% of the increase in employment has been in high-skilled occupation. 75% of the increase has been in full-time employment. And wages growth now exceeds inflation for the 8th consecutive month after the excellent results this week. So I'm going to make a little bit of progress, because I'm conscious of the fact we've got 1 or 2 maiden speeches and quite a highly subscribed debate. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, looking at what we did in the last Parliament, In 2010, the priority clearly for the Prime Minister and the Chancellor was to put in place a jobs-based recovery. And we all know the result at that time. 1,000 jobs created every day, as I said, 3/4 of those full-time. The employment rate is now at its highest on record, 73.5%, and around the highest level on record at 31.1 million. And we make no apology for prioritising job growth over the last 5 years. That is the best way to make people's lives better, as the nearly 12,000 people who found employment in the Shadow Chancellor's constituency will surely agree. But at the same time, we also put in place important supply-side measures to improve our national productivity. We increased average public and private infrastructure investment to around £47 billion a year between 2011 and 2014, which is over a sixth higher than under the previous Parliament. We've completed, Madam Deputy Speaker, 15 major schemes on the strategic road network worth £3.4 billion, with a further 17 schemes worth £2.5 billion underway. We have completed over 2,650 infrastructure projects, and we've extended access to superfast broadband to over 2.5 million more premises. We've accelerated the Academies programme, with over 4,600 academies now opened, and we've set the path for high-speed rail to unleash the full potential of our northern cities. We protected science budget in cash terms and set out a long-term capital commitment on the science budget as well, ensuring it will rise in line with the duration of this Parliament, of course.
Would the Minister agree that, or recognise that in a constituency like mine in the south of England, in Hove, 90% of the businesses employ less than 8 people? The skills challenge and the productivity challenge we have is the softer side, the entrepreneurial skills. And he mentions the skills challenge there and the setting up of academies. Would he acknowledge that we need to invest more in the soft skills and the communicative skills and the entrepreneurial skills that young people need to come into an economy like mine?
Well, I thank him and I welcome him to this place. I don't necessarily disagree with anything that he's just said. And I'm sure, however, equally he would welcome what has been done in Hove over the last 5 years. The unemployment has fallen by, I think, almost 1,200 in his constituency, which is a 53% fall in joblessness. So, yes, we will look at all the things he proposes, but he must also recognise what has been delivered for his constituency. Madam Deputy Speaker, we've also raised the annual budget of Innovate UK, the core innovation support mechanism for businesses in the UK, from £360 million in 2011 to over £500 million in 2015-16. And the Honourable Gentleman, I'm sure, will be delighted to learn we've put a premium on apprenticeships, of which over 2.2 million were created, with a pledge to deliver 3 million in this Parliament. And as I say, last year we started to see productivity beginning to rise. Though we are still below our pre-crisis peak, I think we agree on the extent of the problem. The OBR expects productivity to pick up in 2015 and beyond, and grow at a reasonable rate after that every year of the forecast period, which is good news for businesses and for individuals, and has undoubtedly contributed to our economic recovery. But let me just say a few words, Madam Deputy Speaker, about the next 5 years, because although a lot has been done, now is the time to redouble our efforts. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, told the CBI last month that we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity right now to find an extra gear for the British economy. Our productivity plan will set out how we do that, and I will not and cannot be expected to preempt that plan. But let me remind honourable members of the commitments we made in our manifesto to boost productivity. We said that we will invest in infrastructure. Previous governments failed to take the decisions which other countries did, so we fell behind in the 90s and in the time of the last government. Can you imagine, Madam Deputy Speaker, that in 2010 we didn't even have a national infrastructure plan? I appreciate the honourable gentleman was not here between 2005 and 2010. He had actually lost his seat in Shipley. But he was actually a government minister in the government for part of that time. So he might have been able to raise some of those points when he was sat around the table. I'm going to make a little bit more progress. I'll come back. We've caught up a lot since then, but our historic stop-start approach has meant that, frankly, our physical infrastructure is not nearly as good as it should be. And now is our opportunity to fix that. We're going to invest... I'm going to make a little bit more progress. We'll invest over £100 billion in our infrastructure over the next Parliament, over £70 billion in transport alone, of which £15 billion on our roads. Investing in broadband, I'll come back to it in a moment. Investing in broadband, investing in home building, commitment to build 200,000 starter homes to be sold at a 20% discount, exclusively for first-time buyers under the age of 40. And I give way to my honourable friend, the member for Weaver Vale, and welcome him back to the House for his fantastic election result last month.
I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend. I was just wondering if you could remind the House of the record of the previous Labour government in 13 years. In 1997, 20% of GDP was in manufacturing. By 2010, it dropped to less than 10%.
It's quite right. The previous Labour government had a dreadful record on manufacturing, and that is one of the key challenges, and I think it also reads through to productivity that we will have in this Parliament. I'm going to give way to the member for Washington. I've allowed you quite a bit of time, the member for Nottingham, so I'm going to give way to you.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm the Member of Parliament for Middlesbrough South and East Clean, but I welcome the Minister to his new role. Of course, in the last 5 years, under the coalition government, manufacturing shrunk by 1%. In actual fact, in terms of productivity, the North East is probably the lead region in the country, mainly down to its chemical and pharmaceutical sectors. However, they've seen the largest slump over the last 5 years, mainly due to the lack of investment. Does the Minister agree that one of the problems behind that is that this government imposed a unilateral carbon floor price tax on energy-intensive industries, and didn't the Chancellor promise to bring in a compensation mechanism? Could he speak about that, because that is not to preempt the Chancellor's emergency budget in July?
Well, I thank him for that series of questions. I'm going to say that I think his use of statistics was highly selective, and I'm sure he will join me. He will join me in celebrating the fact that the region of the whole country where unemployment is falling the fastest and employment rising also. So employment rising the fastest. The two fastest regions are actually the North West and the North East. The North East, of all regions of the country, leads the way in export growth across all regions in the country. And I'm sure he would join me as well in welcoming the fall in unemployment in his constituency in the last government by 1,518, again just shy of a 50% fall in productivity. And I will give way to the very patient member for Nottingham.
Thank the member for Fulham for that, for giving way. If he would be so good as to just look at the point he was making on transport infrastructure. I raised the question of the Davies Commission on airport capacity. He knows that is an issue affecting Britain's productivity as a whole. Can he give us an assurance that the government will make a swift decision when presented with the final conclusions of that Commission's report, and not kick it into the long grass until the end of the year or beyond?
I thank him for that intervention, and the position is unchanged. The position is as laid out in our manifesto, that we await the publication of the Davies report and we will act accordingly. But the government also recognises that there is an issue here on airport capacity, which is why we commissioned the Davies report in the first. I'm going to make more progress because I'm conscious of the fact that there are others wishing to speak. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you very much. In my constituency, the A358 runs from my constituency of Yeovil up to the M5 and to all the new jobs that are going to come on stream at Hinkley Point. Will my honourable friend confirm that, unlike the Labour Party, who had planned before the election to cancel that dualling of that road, that will not happen under this government?
I thank my honourable friend and congratulate him on his amazing election result, which was a fantastic achievement, I think unseating one of my predecessors as Chief Secretary. But I think in terms of the road that he mentioned, the A358, yes, of course we are committed to still delivering the A358. I have to mention, by the way, I think it was the party opposite. They only made two proposals, Madam Deputy Speaker, for reducing the deficit during the course of the campaign, both of which were highly misguided, including the cuts to the A358. And so finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, It is in many ways a vindication of what we have achieved since 2010 that we are now debating the issue of productivity. Because over the last 5 years, well, actually, the honourable gentleman says he's been raising it, but I've gone back, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I've gone through all of the speeches, or not all of them, because I couldn't find them all, but most of the speeches he made when he was leading the Gordon Brown for Leadership campaign of the Labour Party in 2007. I've also gone through the speeches he made when he was backing Ed Balls for Labour leader in 2010. And I must say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I could find scant reference to the word productivity. I'm going to finish now. And so in so many ways, a vindication of our record for the last 5 years that we are debating the issue of productivity. Many of us will remember the debates that he led on talking about mass unemployment, the cost of living crisis, too far, too fast, all of these things which turned out to be absolutely wrong in his approach. Well, we now have financial stability, we've got unemployment down to historic lows, and this year living standards are forecast to grow at their fastest rate since 2010. And that's all thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the tough decisions we've made. We've now a great opportunity to step things up a gear and solve a challenge which has been a drag on the UK's economy for decades. The wind is blowing in the right direction. We have a falling deficit, a growing economy, a historic mandate, a firm resolve to tackle this issue and the right team to do so. That, Madam Deputy Speaker, is how we deliver for the people of the United Kingdom, and that is what this government will do.
Michelle Thomson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, firstly, can I commend the speech from the honourable member, and can I note also that he's clearly been reading the SNP manifesto in the comments on female participation in the workplace and the gravitational pull of London, and I hope he enjoyed it. I'd also comment that productivity in the UK is indeed low and has actually shrunk. I'd like to just quote the figures here, year on year over the past 7 years. It's actually 0.7%. In fact, it's now 17% lower than the average of G7 economies and has had an associated impact on living standards. Growth in the EU has been 5% over the same period. UK GDP is only now returning to pre-crash levels, a point most of our European competitors reached many years ago. The downturn in the UK was steeper and lasted longer than that of our neighbours, and recovery has also taken longer. The much vaunted recent growth has only brought us back to a point. Yes, Michelle?
Would the Honourable Lady not recognise that we were more dependent on the financial services sector than any other country in the G7 and in the EU? That undoubtedly made an impact on our productivity over that period.
Thank you for that comment, and I'm going to address that in my remarks. So the much vaunted recent growth has only brought us back to a certain point. However, when judged against smaller nations in the population around 3 to 10 million, the sluggishness of UK PLC is laid bare for all to see. Sweden's productivity is 18% higher. Denmark's is 26% higher. Norway's an incredible 77% higher. Even poor Finland, with no oil, no fisheries, no substantive premium food and drink industry, in fact none of the inherent advantages and natural resources that Scotland enjoys, delivers a productivity performance some 8% higher than the UK. But of course this phenomenon isn't just limited to Scandinavia. In Central Europe, Austria's productivity is 13% higher and Switzerland is 23% higher.
Will the Honourable Lady give way?
Yes, I shall.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I think the picture that she paints of many small, successful countries is one which we are all familiar with, and I'm delighted to see that our friends in the Scottish Government has an aggressive agenda of investing in innovation and skills. Would it not be the case that if we had the powers in Scotland over taxation, that we could do the things that would allow us to deliver these higher rates of productivity that we see in many small, successful European countries?
Deputy Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his comments, and I'm inclined to agree. And again, furthermore, I shall address this further in my remarks. The sad fact is that the recent...
I know that it's the vogue for the Scottish nationalists to blame everything on Westminster Parliament. Would you not accept that most of the supply side measures which could be introduced to improve productivity are actually in the hands of the government in Scotland already?
We don't.
I thank the honourable member for his remarks, but quite frankly, that is wrong. And I'm going to cover that also in my remarks. The sad fact is that the recent growth in UK GDP has not been driven by increased productivity, not by focusing on increased investment levels or high-value sectors. Instead, it's been delivered with zero-hour contracts, often paying the minimum wage and where employee engagement is low. This is not the way to power a modern 21st century economy. We see the results of this poor performance in our manufacturing sector, and we touched on this earlier. Previously, this did indeed account for some 30% of total GDP, a position shared with many of our European neighbours. However, lack of investment and a focus on the City of London has resulted in a manufacturing percentage of GDP barely into double figures. I'm going to make some progress, if you don't mind. With only a limited set of powers, the Scottish Government has set out an ambitious strategy to increase Scotland's productivity. And as a result, Scotland's economy has already seen sustained growth over recent years and record numbers of people in employment. Female participation in the labour market has increased, and Scotland's female employment has reached a record high. Including more women in the workforce is a powerful driver to increase productivity and encourages a balanced and inclusive economy. The Scottish Government's plans to expand the provision of free childcare will encourage more parents into work too. It's worthy of note, of course, that between 2007, in fact the year of the SNP election to Holyrood, and 2013, the largest relative rise in productivity of any region or nation in the UK was in Scotland. This debate must fundamentally be about ambition, something that the SNP has in droves, and our ambition is much more than simply a return to pre-recession levels of economic performance. Allow me, Madam Deputy Speaker, to highlight some key areas that the Scottish Government's economic strategy, a real long-term economic plan, promotes.
The Honourable Lady give way on that point. I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and she's making a very good speech. She will note the fact that in the last 3 years under the previous coalition government, Chinese import of steel has risen by 40%. Does she think it was helpful that the Scottish Executive awarded a contract for the Firth of Forth Bridge to a Chinese company instead of using British steel?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments, but would add that we didn't make the steel in Scotland, and also it's the Scottish Government and not the Scottish Executives. Moving on, internationalisation, helping firms to compete in international markets, to increase exports, to make Scotland a preferred location for inward investment, and most importantly for my business background, to promote Scotland the brand of we are outward looking, we are ambitious and we are open for business. The plan also promotes investment in our infrastructure, in our transport, in technology and digital connectivity. Yes, I shall.
Thank you, Honourable Lady. Would she agree that one of the key components of our productivity strategy has to be building on that essential power of the production of knowledge? And in that regard, our universities throughout the UK, our world-class universities in Scotland, are a key here, and that it is vitally important that we protect, indeed enhance, research funding through the universities.
I thank my honourable friend for his comments and absolutely agree. Indeed, I'm going to cover it further in my remarks. In our people who live and give to Scotland, we must equip them with the skills and support them with free university education and give them the health, the ambition and the engagement to contribute to making Scotland a great place. Deputy Madam Speaker, I mentioned manufacturing earlier. The SNP supports measures to boost this sector, including targeted research and development tax credits and support through the Scottish Business Development Bank. However, I must comment the lack of access to business funding remains the biggest critical factor affecting small business, which is the lifeblood of our economy, and I still await any evidence of this being recognised and acted upon by the Government. The plan promotes innovation, creating a culture of ambition and drive where we reward the risk-taking entrepreneurs, those who drive real change and live by creative and adaptive thinking. It does indeed support our excellent universities in commercialising the work they do. Finally, the plan promotes inclusivity in the form of building a labour market that can contribute equitably by promoting fair work and sustainable jobs, by taking positive steps to ensure families can contribute and lead the way in supported childcare. With further devolution of employment law and the minimum wage, the Scottish Parliament could boost paying standards and raise employee satisfaction still further. We want to see more sustainable and high-quality employment opportunities with a partnership approach to employment conditions. We have also proposed a £2 rise in the minimum wage to £8.70 by 2020 and have actively promoted the living wage. So, the Scottish Government is doing what it can with the devolved powers it currently has, and given Scotland's impressive relative performance since 2007, it's been successful. The truth is, Deputy Madam Speaker, that the UK operates a failed and outdated business model, one that delivers for the few but not for the many. One that, with its focus on the City of London and its neglect of key manufacturing and other high-value add sectors, has failed to deliver for the people of Scotland as well as many across many other parts of the UK. Yes, I shall.
Lady not welcome the fact that the United Kingdom has the highest growth in the G7, the highest levels of employment on record and the lowest unemployment since 1975. Doesn't she welcome those things?
Of course I welcome those things. What I am suggesting is that we can do much better, that we have the ambition in Scotland and with the further powers, because I hear a lot of talk and not enough about really substantive ambition. We need to do a lot more. We in Scotland are ready for that.
He hasn't seen the Q1 growth rates for Europe and UK. Go and look at those.
Delivering more meaningful powers, meaningful economic powers to the Scottish Parliament, and not the extremely limited ones included in the Scotland Bill, will allow a much more holistic and comprehensive economic strategy. With full tax, investment and employment powers, the Scottish Government can implement policies to boost economic growth and raise productivity levels in Scotland. We have the ambition. Thank you.
Here.
Before I call the next speaker, it will be obvious to the House that there are a great many people who wish to speak. We also have maiden speeches this afternoon, and then I have to therefore impose a time limit of 6 minutes. Mr. John Redwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The productivity puzzle, I think, can be understood and resolved. It's a combination of bad news and not such bad news. There was a very sharp fall in productivity at the time of the crisis because we lost a lot of very expensive output, a lot of people lost their jobs, and the net result was a big fall. And that since the crisis has hit, there has been a continued loss of top-end jobs in areas like oil and financial services and banking, which score very well in the way that people compile productivity figures. Because if you have an industry like oil, which produces a lot of extremely valuable output and it has a limited number of very well-paid people, then that gives you an enormous boost to your productivity, as we've learnt today from Norway. And we have just lived through a period when, through no fault of any of the three governments being presiding over it, there has been a very sharp decline in the output of oil because it's now a very mature province, and there's been a big fall in the oil price recently, which is market circumstance relating to things happening well away from this country. There was also a very big loss of top-end jobs in banking and financial services. There will be mixed views on that in the House of Commons over the social value of those jobs, but they scored very well in the run-up to the crash. Some of them have now gone altogether. Some of them have gone to lower tax jurisdictions elsewhere, and that accounts, the bad news side of it, for the drop in productivity during the crisis and the slow growth since the crisis. The better reason why our productivity is below that of some of our continental comparators is that we've gone for a model, I think with the agreement of all parties, I hope, of having many more people in employment and creating conditions in which this economy can create a lot more lower-paid jobs in the hope that that will lead on to higher-paid jobs and more output and activity, which I think is a better model than those people being out of work. And the way the productivity figures are calculated, if you have a country which sacks 10% of the workforce, the least 10% productive people in the economy, which is the kind of thing the euro was doing to some of our competitor countries in Euroland, then their productivity can be flattered by that, because the least productive jobs go, the productivity of the total country actually rises, but I think they're a lot worse off, because you've then suddenly got 10% out of work who would otherwise have been in less productive jobs. It's the same in a business, that a business which may be below average productivity in its industry, the easiest way it can get to average or above average productivity is to close its worst factory, but that isn't always the answer that people in this House would like. I give way.
Thank you for taking away. I mean, the honourable member is making the best he can of a bad job. But, for instance, if you look at the share of R&D in gross domestic product in the UK, it is down over not just the 1990s when we had the last Conservative government, but it's down on the period 2000 to 2007. That's a fundamental component of productivity. It is down. You cannot gainsay that.
You have to first understand a problem before you can then address the problem. I think we are actually all in agreement in this House on this issue. Would we like productivity higher? Yes, we would. Yeah. Would we like more better paid jobs? Yes, we would. Conservatives as much as any other party in this House, probably more than any other party in this House, because we not only will the end, more high paid jobs, but we're prepared to take some of the decisions that parties opposite always deny or query in order to allow those better paid jobs to be created. So let me go on from the analysis. I hope the honourable gentleman will reflect on what I've said and understand that I have provided a good explanation of the path that productivity has taken since 2007, which is a matter of common concern but has some understandable things that you cannot address. You cannot suddenly wish a lot more oil into Scotland which you can produce, and that remains a fact, and you won't suddenly create all those high-end banking jobs, and some parties obviously probably wouldn't like them anyway. So we are where we are. But what we can do about productivity is to work away on those parts of the economy where the performance has been most disappointing. Briefly.
My right honourable friend agree that actually cutting some of the red tape which kind of small and medium-sized businesses face would actually help. Just is one small part which would help with the productivity puzzle.
That could, if you have ineffective or over-the-top regulation. Removing it can give more people access to market and more competitive challenge. But you need some regulation because we need rules and certain guarantees in the market. But let's take a sector I asked the Shadow Chancellor about. I think it was a problem that in the Labour years we had a long period when there was practically no growth in public sector productivity. Now, the concept of productivity is more difficult in parts of the public sector. I'm the first to admit that. Because people actually like more teachers relative to the number of pupils, because they hope that will create better teaching and better system in classes. But of course it does mean productivity falls. So you then need, in other parts of the public sector where the productivity issue is more straightforward or more like the private sector, to be even better so that the overall performance of the public sector does not lag behind and cause difficulties. And as we have quite a big public sector in this economy, the performance of the public sector is very important. It also happens to be the area where government ministers have most control and most direct influence. So I think it is the area that this House should spend more time on, because we are collectively responsible for the performance of the public sector. I think most parties now agree we want to get more for less in the public sector so that we can control public spending. There are disagreements about how much control on public spending, but I hope there's agreement that if you can do more for less with improving the quality or not damaging the quality, that is a good thing to do. So I draw the House's attention. I'm afraid I need to move on because many people wish to speak and time is limited. So I draw my right honourable friend's attention to the issue I raised with him in my intervention. And one very important industry, which is almost completely nationalised, the tracks and the signals and the stations are completely nationalised, and the train operating companies are very strongly regulated and controlled by franchises, so they are almost nationalised, is the railway industry. And it is a growing industry. It is an industry which this government is committing a lot of money to. It is an industry which I think all the main parties in the House wish to commit money to and wish to grow and invest in. But the McNulty report, which I think was in 2011, which was an independent study, showed that our railway does less for more cost than comparable railways on the continent. And this should be a matter of great concern, and I hope it will be a matter for review by those dealing with railways and with public spending. Because what we need to do is, as we channel those huge sums of monies into our railway to try and get expansion and improvement, we need to pull off that trick that the best private sector companies manage, which is that you drive quality up and costs down at the same time. Because one of the myths in some public sector managers' minds is that a cut in the amount you spend is bound to lead to worse quality or impaired service. Whereas every day in a good private sector company, they go to work saying, how can I spend less and serve the customer better? How can I apply new technology so that I get more for less? How can I have a better skilled and better motivated workforce? I hope it's not done by unpleasant management, because that usually leads to the wrong results. How can you motivate the workforce more so that they are empowered to achieve more and do less? That is the spirit we need in the public sector, and if we began with the railways, it would make a very important contribution to improving our overall productivity record.
Iain Wright.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the right honourable gentleman. I seem to recall reading in the Financial Times 3 or 4 weeks ago an extremely perceptive article by him on productivity, and so it is a real pleasure to follow him. He's thought about these issues incredibly well. I'm pleased that we're discussing productivity so early in this Parliament. UK output per hour is about a fifth below that of the rest of the G7. It's the largest gap since 1991. In France, output per hour is increased by 2%. In the US, it's increased by 9%. Ours hasn't shifted. Now, it's been said time and time again, Madam Deputy Speaker, if we want rising living standards and a historically decent long-term economic growth trend of 2.5–3%, productivity needs to improve. I certainly will.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in France, their productivity figures may well have been achieved at the expense of extremely high unemployment. Is the honourable gentleman suggesting he would like to see very high unemployment here in exchange for fractionally better productivity?
Represent a constituency in the North East that's suffered and has still the scars of long-term unemployment. I don't want to see unemployment at all, and we need to address that. But in order to remain competitive in the global economy, productivity has to be addressed. Now, I think the honourable gentleman, the member for I can't remember now actually, who's no longer in his place, was talking about that not all sectors of the economy have been affected by stagnating productivity. And it's true. High-value manufacturing sectors like aerospace and automotives have seen huge leaps in productivity in recent years. They've led to better, more innovative products that are more competitive than our rivals' products and which are sold in increasing numbers around the world. He mentioned Nissan in Sunderland, which produces a car every 61 seconds to rival any other car plant on Earth. This week we're seeing the Paris Air Show, where something like £7.8 billion of products based in the UK have been sold around the world. We need to encourage this virtuous cycle, Madam Deputy Speaker, because that will lead to more well-paid jobs in these sectors. It's the model of the British economy we should be encouraging. And to be fair, credit must be given to Vince Cable and David Willits, when in the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills, for continuing the approach set out by the previous Labour government. Indeed, that long-term approach, a mature business policy, transcending individual parliaments and thinking what's required for our economy for the next 20 or 30 years, gives business the confidence to invest for the long term. And we've seen the dividends of such an approach with globally competitive sectors like aerospace and automotives. But I worry, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we've seen no endorsement of this approach from the new Business Secretary. It's concerning that in his interview with the Financial Times about 2 weeks ago, it seemed to draw a line under that approach of industrial strategy that has helped competitive sectors succeed in Britain. Great examples of business-government collaboration like the Automotive Council, the Aerospace Growth Partnership and the Aerospace Technology Institute, which has brought billions of pounds of investment into Britain, no longer seem to have Minister's attention. Is the new Business Secretary going to adopt a new approach? Is that long-term business policy going to wither on the vine under his watch. I think that would be to the detriment of long-term, high-value economic success and improvements in productivity. And I would hope that the Minister, when responding, would provide clarity as to what the new government's policy on industrial strategy will be. A key way to improve our competitiveness and our productivity is to invest in new technology and innovation. However, our long-term performance on this is woeful and has been for far too long. UK gross domestic R&D expenditure as a percentage of our GDP peaked in 1986 at 2.03%. In the past 15 years or so, R&D spend as a percentage of GDP has been within a range of around about 1.59 to 1.73%, well below the EU average and significantly below ambitiously innovative nations. South Korea spends 5 times as much on R&D, not as a percentage of its economy, but the actual amount as the average European nation. And this relentless focus on innovation and moving up the value chain has reaped massive rewards. Half a century ago, Madam Deputy Speaker, South Korea was poorer than Bolivia and Mozambique. Now it's richer than Spain and New Zealand. That's the lesson we have to learn. We are living in what could be the most significant era of challenge and innovation for humanity. Britain's historic strengths in science and in things like pharmaceuticals, aerospace and motor vehicles should and could be harnessed much more and spread throughout the economy in a much more balanced way. We're complacent in the extreme if we think we can carry on as before and not provide more resources to R&D. So will the government commit to prioritising science? What are the future of the catapult centres, which have seen government and industry collaborate on a range of issues relating to technology and innovation? And will funding be secure in these areas? A further way, Madam Deputy Speaker, we will rise up the productivity chain and through competitiveness is by emphasising skills. The days from 40 years ago when somebody in my constituency would leave school on the Friday at the age of 15 and start work at the steelworks on the Monday and stay there for 35 years, that's gone. It will never come back. The modern British workforce will need to adapt and retrain and, crucially, given the opportunity to do so. Men and women in Hartlepool and elsewhere may be made redundant in their 30s and 40s, but will need the means to retrain for a new career, quite possibly several different careers. But BIS, supposedly the Department for Growth, is cutting the adult skills budget by 11% in this financial year. The total budget from the department for adult FE and skills funding will fall not just in real terms but in absolute terms by 5%. And when the first cuts took place in this Parliament, announced by the Chancellor in the Queen's speech a couple of weeks ago, for BIS, £450 million was stripped out of further and higher education. That's not the way we're going to have a modern, innovative workforce. Shouldn't we be prioritising adult skills? I think we should have flexibility in these areas to make sure we can maintain Britain's future prosperity. As Neil Carberry, CBI Director for Employment and Skills, said just today, if we are to deliver sustainable higher wage growth, we need to see a rise in productivity. That means business investing in skills and the government helping firms innovate by supporting investment next month's budget. I hope, for the sake of future prosperity, productivity gains and our competitiveness as a nation, the government responds to these concerns and makes sure that we can be a high-value, innovative nation that can compete with the rest of the world.
Yeah. Oliver Dowden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As this is my maiden speech, may I begin by saying that I have the tremendous privilege of representing the constituency of Hertsmere. Hertsmere was created in 1983, incorporating much of the then constituency of Enfield West, which was for many years represented by the late Iain MacLeod. Iain MacLeod is well known in this House as a proponent of the one nation tradition of conservatism, something that I'm very proud is so well represented in this government's legislative programme. Perhaps a little less well known, though, is the fact that as Minister for Health in the 1950s, he was the first person to announce that the link between smoking and lung cancer had been proven. He did this at a press conference through which he train-smoked continuously. Iain MacLeod was a tremendous politician and parliamentarian, and his death in 1970 cut short his service to this House. His immediate successor was Cecil Parkinson, now Lord Parkinson. It's almost 25 years since he stood down as our Member of Parliament, and to this day he remains very fondly remembered in the constituency. Of course, for the central role that he played in the transformative Thatcher governments of the 1980s, but also for his tremendous personal warmth and charm, something that he's kindly demonstrated towards me on many, many occasions. My most recent predecessor was James Clapperson. James is a true gentleman who was absolutely devoted to his duties in this House, both as a minister in the 1990s and as a diligent constituency Member of Parliament. He remains fiercely committed to defending the Jewish community in this country. Indeed, his very first intervention in this House was to attack the scourge of anti-Semitism in this country. This is of particular importance in Hertsmere, where we have one of the fastest growing Jewish communities in the country. So I can assure the House that I will do my utmost to continue his excellent work. Many other faiths, though, thrive in Hertsmere. In particular, our Christian community remains strong, and I saw that this weekend when I joined the congregation at St Mary's in Potters Bar for a joyful celebration of their centenary. But members may also be interested to know that we are home to the United Kingdom Hare Krishna community. Their temple is a delightful place where you can always be sure of a very warm welcome, but maybe not quite as warm as that accorded to its cows. They are hand-milked, treated to massages, with scented candles, soothing music, in a spacious cowshed made of the finest French oak. This luxurious residence is known locally as the Ritz of the cow world. Though I should assure you that the cowshed is not the only place of beauty in Hertsmere. With villages such as Shenley, Ordnam and the neighbouring Letchmore Heath, you will find no finer spots on this island. But this beauty is given greater poignancy by its sheer fragility, for Hertsmere is 80% green belt. It lies at the very southern edge of Hertfordshire. When you stand in the delightful churchyard at Ridge, where the Earl Alexander of Tunis rests, you see ahead of you the last unspoiled rolling hills of England before the home counties give way to London. And it was during childhood walks through these fields that my love of the English countryside was fostered. They give us the space to roam and enjoy nature, enhance the charm and character of our towns and villages, and I am absolutely determined to preserve them from soulless urban sprawl so that my children and grandchildren may enjoy them as I have done. Yeah. Hertsmere also has the distinction of being at the heart of the British film industry. So many films, from Star Wars to most recently Paddington Bear the movie, have been shot at Elstree Film Studios in Boreham Wood. We also play home to BBC at Elstree, which is home to the permanent set of EastEnders. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, you may be surprised to hear that this allows me to make a legitimate claim to be the Member of Parliament for Albert Square. But what characterises Hertsmere, far more than its landscape, its industry, is the character of its people. People who get up very early every morning and from Bushey, Potters Bar, Radlett and Boreham Wood cram onto commuter trains or set off along the M25 or the A1, hard-working men and women making sacrifices to provide for themselves, their family and their community, knowing that in this life you don't get something for nothing, but you have to work in order to get something out. And growing up locally, I was very much imbued with those values. My dad worked in a factory in Watford, my mum at a chemist in St Albans. They worked hard and were determined to give me the very best start in life. And that started with the excellent education that I received at my local comprehensive school. And these are the values that have built the prosperity of this country. And these are the very values that lie at the heart of this debate today on productivity. Yeah. For it's only if, as we are doing with this government, we take tough choices to reform welfare, to control our deficit, that we can continue to invest in our infrastructure, invest in our schools, and cut taxes so that hard-working people keep more of what they earn. Yeah. This is how we boost productivity, by pursuing this government's aspirational agenda that will deliver for the hard-working people of Hertsmere.
Harry Harpham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I congratulate the member for Hertsmere and say what a pleasure it is to follow him. As a new member for Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough,
I stand here with a good deal of trepidation, knowing the tireless and dedicated service which my predecessor, David Blunkett, devoted to his constituents. From both the front and back benches, David fought unceasingly to improve the lives of ordinary people. David is Sheffield through and through. He was born in the constituency he'd go on to represent, became a councillor at the age of 22 and led the city through the turbulent years of the 1980s. He was elected to the Commons in 1987, moved swiftly into the shadow cabinet and finally became a cabinet minister in 1997. He fought ferociously for his view in cabinet, and although he may not always have got his way, as a lifelong Sheffield Wednesday supporter, he was well accustomed to taking the rough with the smooth. He carried the views of his constituents into cabinet, and despite his heavy workload as Secretary of State for Education and Employment in Labour's first term, and as Home Secretary dealing with the aftermath of the Oldham riots and the 9/11 terrorist atrocities in New York, he made a point of continuing to attend his constituency advice surgeries in person. He was relentless in his desire to drive up education standards and improve the educational opportunities of all. Throughout his career, David was dedicated to the idea that for democracy to be worth the name, it should be a truly collaborative endeavour, and that politicians should reach out to the disaffected and to the disenfranchised. I pay tribute to the work of a man who has made an indelible mark on British politics. Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough covers the north-east of the city and is dominated by the low-rise housing which was originally built for those working in the steel industry centred in the nearby Don Valley. These days, employment patterns are more diverse, and many of my constituents work in the retail sector and in health and social care. There is an Iron Age hill fort at the eastern end of the constituency on Winkerbank Hill. This was built by the Bigrants tribe to keep out the Roman legions. So clearly, our ancestors were against further integration with Europe. Perhaps, if they'd had the Prime Minister renegotiate the terms, they might have thought differently. Despite this force, we're a diverse constituency, but we're a community that faces some stiff challenges. My constituency is ranked 19th highest in the country for a proportion of people claiming job seekers allowance, 6.4%, a rate well over double the national average. And the number of children living in poverty is double that found across the UK as a whole. So much of the so-called economic recovery in our area has come in the form of low-paid, zero-hour contract work, leaving families unable to budget from one week to the next. And despite the Chancellor's crowing, there are far too many of my constituents who are still struggling to make ends meet. There are 6,000 households in my constituency living in fuel poverty, 14% of the total in the whole of the Yorkshire and Humberside region. And this is one of the issues I will be taking up vigorously over the coming weeks and months. Though I welcome the Government's commitment to full employment and the creation of more apprenticeships, this by itself is not enough. We need not just more jobs, but better jobs. Our poor productivity is holding back our economy and holding down living standards. I am deeply concerned that the Government has no clear plan for boosting output. What we need is the investment in infrastructure and a properly thought-out skills agenda that will lead not only to more stable, meaningful jobs, but will address the pressing problem of productivity Britain is facing. Unless ministers act on this, not only will UK businesses fall behind their international competitors, but working people will not see this improvement in their standards of living, which the government rhetoric tends them to think of. In Sheffield, budget cuts have left the public services that so many of my constituents depend on struggling to cope. In spite of the innovative and dedicated efforts of the Council, local NHS services and ordinary men and women in my constituency, people are turning for support which more and more simply isn't there. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am originally from Nottinghamshire. At 15, I left school on the Friday and started down the pit on the Monday morning. I had no qualifications to speak of. It was moving to Sheffield that gave me a second chance at education. It's the city where the knowledge that everyone's chances can be improved can be found both in our past, and I will do my best to make sure in our future. I got into politics because I know the good that can be done by public servants working in the interests of the communities they serve. And from these green benches, I will do what I can to protect those services from ideological attacks which would see them reduced to a shadow and those they serve left paying the price.
Yeah. Before I call the next speaker, I'm afraid I have to reduce the time limit to 4 minutes in order to accommodate as many members as possible. So with that in mind, I call Hugh Merriman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And before I start, may I pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough for his moving speech about a part of the world I know well from spending 2.5 years fighting you, Madam Deputy Speaker, in North East Derbyshire, where my productivity was not that of the Honourable Member. May I also pay tribute to my honourable friend, the Member for Hertsmere, for a fantastic, polished speech, one that I would like to follow now, but I somewhat feel I may fail. And in talking about productivity, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm reminded that the concept itself requires the measurement of quantity of goods and services produced per unit of labour input. And whilst many on this side of the House would maintain that it has indeed been labour input which has caused the lack of productivity via the party opposite in its role in government during the economic crisis of 2007, I wish to explore the performance of my government since 2010. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, in short, I would contend that the success in the creation of 2 million new jobs in a difficult economic climate may have had some impact in the ratio of goods and services produced per unit of labour, but this increased employment will ultimately cause an increase in productivity, which I believe we are on the cusp of enjoying if we remain on the same course that we have plotted since 2010. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, in reaching this conclusion, I am indebted to the excellent article The UK Productivity Puzzle, which was published by the Bank of England. The report explores the various factors at play in reasons why productivity has not behaved as one would expect following a recession. And again, I consider these reasons to be grounds for reflection or optimism, in that, firstly, the UK electorate has been protected by the government's macro intervention since 2010. Secondly, companies have been focusing their output on matters such as research and development, which are not measured in productivity figures until unleashed on the market. And thirdly, that we have new entrants to the workforce, some of whom are economic migrants, who have the potential to increase our productivity as they excel up the career ladder. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll briefly take each of these points in turn. In terms of firstly protecting the UK electorate, unlike in prior recessions, UK PLC has not shed its workforce but has retained its staff. Companies have kept going and kept workers employed and deserve our thanks for doing so. These positive survival rates for businesses can also be put down to the increased forbearance of banks with respect to small and medium enterprises. Previous recessions, banks have failed to stand by businesses which experience falls in profitability. Thanks to the pressure applied by this government since 2010, companies have been able to ride out the recession because banks have been forced to stand by them. And in addition to these banks, the Treasury, the Bank of England and HMRC have also played a part by providing incentives to employ, to keep interest rates low, and in granting time-to-pay schemes for staffing levels to be maintained and for recruitment to occur. Please.
Thank you. Does my honourable friend share the view that it's the party opposite that were previously trying to raise taxes for businesses that would have put people out of work and put job security at risk?
I absolutely agree with that. And indeed, these decisions and the extra 2 million new jobs which have been created, they may have had some impact on productivity from a statistical sense, but this is what a one-nation government should do, and it's markedly different to the behaviour of other governments during past recessions. It's also, Madam Deputy Speaker, different to measures taken by countries such as France. French productivity may be higher, but France created less jobs between 2010 and 2015 than Yorkshire did. The French labour market is so regulated and expensive that French companies opt out of it by failing to hire. Higher productivity can mean lower employment and vice versa. My second cause of optimism for increased productivity is the output to come, I beg your pardon. Companies have had to work harder to win or maintain a stagnant order book, perhaps moving labour to roles such as sales and marketing, which would not count as output in the national accounts until the product is sold. As this effort turns to fruition, productivity rates will benefit. A similar argument can be put for research and development. Thanks to this government's programme of incentives to increase R&D, investment has proved strong. The output from R&D is not apparent and not included in the GDP data. But as these returns filter through, and as the Bank of England reports, R&D will bring about relatively prompt and significant improvement in productivity growth.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Please.
Does my honourable friend agree that the rollout of high-speed broadband is vital in constituencies like mine, Caversham and Kent and in his for the productivity of rural businesses?
I thank my honourable friend, and I absolutely agree. It's essential, and it will create capacity and create productivity in parts where infrastructure may find hard to reach. Indeed, these factors will, I believe, allow the UK to overcome the impact on productivity from cyclical and sector changes, such as the scaling back of financial services and the artificial productivity which financial services may themselves have created during the last 10 years. Third cause of optimism is the new workforce. Whilst a high proportion of the 2 million jobs are highly skilled, some obviously are lower skilled and may not yet contribute as much to the UK's productivity. This is part of the investment in people via new jobs and apprenticeships, which will take people up the career ladder to increase productivity. Giving a job opportunity to someone who was previously on welfare can transform their lives and, as they reach their potential, I believe will help our economic productivity as well as enriching the course of social justice in this country. Madam Deputy Speaker, this leads me to conclude that the nation has experienced significant support thanks to action taken by this government since 2010, and this has allowed UK plc to increase the UK employment rate by 2 million jobs. Naturally, with the definition of productivity being the unit of output per unit of labour, this may have impacted overall on productivity rates. But I believe that we stand right to increase our productivity as long as this government stands on its route ahead.
Onwurah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to welcome you to your position and also to welcome the two new members for Hertsmere and Sheffield Brightside, and to say how moved I was by their contributions and how much I'm sure the House will benefit from their careers in this place. Madam Deputy Speaker, low productivity is not in the interests of the UK, not in the interests of employees and not in the interests of business. One of the reasons why the Chancellor missed every single one of his 2010 economics targets was that tax revenues did not meet Treasury forecasts, because the jobs that the last government created were low-paid, low-skilled, insecure jobs for commoditised labour. And whilst the toll on individuals that kind of insecurity wreaks is hard, the toll on the economy is harsh also. We have less money raised in tax, which means that we need more cuts. To improve productivity, we really need to do one of two things: improve the outputs from people or from technology. Now, during my 20 years in industry, including an MBA at Manchester Business School, successful managers often cited to me the bestseller in Classic, In Search of Excellence. In that, it set out two fundamental principles that mark a great company. The first is valuing employees as partners and as, and I quote here, the primary source of productivity gains. And the second is shared values of respect, quality, responsibility. So the Labour Party is absolutely right to champion skills and encourage businesses to value and invest in its employees. What value does a zero-hour contract place on a worker? This government considers labour to be a commodity. and commodities are not productive. You need to give people the skills and the tools, as well as a sense of agency and involvement, to increase their productivity. As Mariana Mazzucato, leading innovation economist, says, productivity does not come from paying workers less or attacking their rights. And that brings me to the second factor in productivity, technology. Now, an article in the Harvard Review of Business yesterday drew on analysis by London Centre for Economic Research to demonstrate that robots contribute 0.36% to total annual productivity growth rates. IT contributes 0.6%. Remember, our productivity is growth is 0.4%, so we could really welcome that increase in contribution. And as leading US technologist economists and investors in the US argued in the Massachusetts Institute of Technology review this month, the technology revolution is delivering an unprecedented set of tools for bolstering growth and productivity, creating wealth and improving the world. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, that does not mean dumping people in low-wage, low-skill, insecure, zero-hour jobs. When I asked the Prime Minister last week about productivity, his answer to me simply showed how little that side understands of what drives productivity. He talked about planning and entrepreneurship. For entrepreneurship to work, we need a competitive environment where new companies can enter and compete, and we need high skills in the workforce. We will never achieve high rates of productivity unless we understand that people, as well as technology, are the key drivers.
Marcus Fysh.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow such excellent maiden speeches, not least the member for Hertsmere, who gave us a wonderful tour of the massage parlours of his constituency. The amount of value we create in our work is key to what we can expect to earn over the long term. We heard earlier this afternoon from the Secretary of State for Education how this government is focused on getting great teaching and skills to our young people so they can give them the best chances in life. I support that, and I'm very keen to make sure that recent improvements on that front in my Yeovil constituency are consolidated and taken further. I want more funding for school places in my county of Somerset too, so we can build a better future for our children, developing their talents to their full potential. Madam Deputy Speaker, I also support the plan for productivity mentioned earlier by the Chief Secretary. We have a plan for productivity, not just platitudes as espoused by the opposition. Differences in productivity levels between G7 nations have in fact been relatively static over time, reflecting widely different structural characteristics, and there are significant measurement problems in the statistics, for example in picking up intangible benefits of changing technology. Productivity growth has dipped in America too in recent years, so it is not just British disease as some are trying to claim. Although we should look to America as an example of an economy with higher productivity growth on average than we have managed over time. Recessions are bad for productivity growth as capital for investment becomes scarce, so confidence in further recovery is definitely a factor for us to encourage. We also must be careful not to restrict our service businesses while we attempt rightly to encourage manufacturing. Services are a huge competitive advantage that we have as a nation, and we need to get them firing on all cylinders and respect their contribution. It is fantastic news that 2 million net new jobs have been taken up since 2010. In my constituency, in the last year alone, the unemployment claimant count has come down by 24%. This is an outstanding achievement and shows that my constituents are finding positive answers to their questions on employment, even if there is more to do, and we need always to prepare for an uncertain future. We must not be complacent and must certainly do what we can to enable employers to make jobs they offer more rewarding, improve the number and quality of apprenticeships, and support businesses with the right policy settings. Of course, we can do better as a nation, and this is indeed important to the national finances as well as personal pay packets. cutting red tape, extending investment allowances, keeping taxes low, investing in infrastructure such as dualling of the A303 and A358, connecting people with broadband, including in rural areas, reopening rail connections in Yeovil and Chard, getting people in their work and ideas to where they need to be. This is what we want to do for people in the South West. Yes.
And he's absolutely right to mention rural broadband, which is an issue which affects many of our constituencies. Would you also agree that an increase in mobile telephone signal as well is very important in the rural areas to help small and medium-sized businesses?
I thank my friend. That's a very, very good point, and it is one that we are pursuing in the South West. But people are not just productivity statistics from a survey in a report. What suits one person won't necessarily suit another, and it is wrong to say that lower paid work is necessarily bad or should not be respected. It's a good thing that all types of jobs are being created. Things are getting better in our country, Madam Deputy Speaker, and we must resist talking down the great achievements and sacrifices that our people have made over the testing period we are coming out of. We can all play our part to build a better future, and if we do the right thing, the statistics will follow.
Steve Reid.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I first of all congratulate you on your new role, and may I add my congratulations to the two honourable members who have made their maiden speeches during this debate. They were both incredibly impressive contributions, and I'm sure the whole House looks forward to hearing much more from both of the honourable gentlemen over the coming years. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, it takes British workers until the end of Friday to produce what a German or American worker has produced by Thursday, and yet British workers work some of the longest hours in the industrialised world. The fault lies not with our workforce, but with a government that has failed on investment. The previous coalition government, after 2010, choked off investment in infrastructure, which damaged the confidence of the private sector to invest. They failed to reform the banking sector with regional and sectoral banks, so it remained difficult for businesses to secure the investment and the borrowing they needed to grow. The economy is becoming more global and more digital. We need a workforce with the skills to match those opportunities, but instead we have continuing cuts to further education, a failure to recognise the importance of vocational education, and pressure on schools to teach learning by rote instead of learning the flexible skills that young people need for tomorrow's economy. Low productivity leads to low pay, and low pay leads to job insecurity and growing levels of household debt. Just like before the crash, Britain is now facing a credit bubble based on an unsustainable housing market. The huge increase of people in work forced to claim benefits to top up poverty pay illustrates just how shaky our economy has become. Now, it's in places like Croydon where the government should be looking to boost productivity. I hope the Chancellor will fully back our Labour Council's Croydon Growth Zone bid by agreeing to the local retention of business rate growth and stamp duty to kick-start a £9 billion programme that will create over 23,000 new jobs, build 8,000 new homes and invest in one of London's fastest-growing tech hubs. Ambitious, creative investment like this is the first step to higher productivity and a more efficient economy. But you cannot build sustainable economic growth on poverty pay, household debt, low skills and job insecurity. A failure to invest might create a short-term boost in profits, but in the long term it leads to decline. This government is planning legislation that will take away workers' rights. It's a huge mistake to think you can only be pro-business by being anti-worker. Our economy can only succeed if we are both pro-business and pro-worker. Instead of a fresh round of anti-union laws that leave people even more secure, the government should give workers a more direct incentive to share in the fortunes of their employer. Workers on company boards, the right to shares in their employer's business, would both encourage the workforce to share in the sacrifices sometimes necessary to boost productivity. A bigger voice for workers would allow companies to benefit from the insights of their own employees. One of the big causes of the crash was a lack of accountability in the banks, which led to cheating and uncontrolled risk. Improving accountability within firms to their own workforce and customers can help to reduce this risk in our economy. Britain has no statutory right to request employer ownership when a company is being dissolved or sold, and we lag behind the rest of the EU in legislating for workers on boards. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is a crying shame that this government treats Britain's workforce as a problem to be contained instead of a resource to be harnessed. Britain can't build sustainable economic growth on low productivity, low skills, low pay and low investment. We need the precise opposite to give our people the opportunity to make the most of globalisation and the digital economy.
Kevin Hollinrake.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak in this very important debate. It's also a pleasure to speak after the excellent contributions, the maiden speeches of the Honourable Gentleman from Sheffield, Brightside, and my honourable friend from Hertsmere. It's important to look at productivity in the context of the overall economy. Productivity is not a means to an end, it's a means to an end itself. We've got to look at the facts and the reasons why we have difficulties with productivity and avoid short-term thinking and let the positive effects of the last 5 years take hold and take a long-term approach to improving progress on this issue. The overall economy is doing well. Employment is up by 2 million since 2010 and in 2014 we're the fastest growing major economy. The CBI on the 8th of June said we should expect solid, steady, sustainable growth with rising incomes. And business investment is making strong contributions to growth. It's important that we do not damage what we already have. It's important that we need to look at the facts behind the data itself and look at the fact that oil and financial services are skewing the figures on overall economic and productivity gains. The key things on productivity are competition, regulation, investment and education. Competition, in my experience, the best way to drive productivity is through efficiency and innovation is to encourage more competition. Time and time again, as a business person, when you're faced with stiff new competition, you raise your game, work harder, motivate your people. 760,000 new private sector businesses were created in the last Parliament, creating 2.3 million jobs. The government is doing what the government does best, setting the stage and letting business get on with creating the jobs. Regulation. There is less red tape in this country now than there was 5 years ago. In 2010, we had the second highest level of red tape in the G7, now the lowest. 50% of businesses want government to focus on reducing regulations. Labour introduced 6 new regulations every day. We must have a government that understands business. And this government wants to cut red tape to cut the cost of red tape by £10 billion over this Parliament. Investment. We need to encourage investment. We need to encourage investment in human capital, better links with schools and universities, and moved over time towards the living wage. Tax credits are an employment subsidy, and subsidies create complacency and inertia. We need a long and stable tax regime. Capital allowances must be consistent. Businesses need a long-term understanding.
I think a brilliant point that he's made about tax credits. As a small business owner, I was very shocked to receive a call from someone who I just emailed, one of my staff. I just emailed to tell them they had a pay rise and they didn't want the pay rise because they would lose so much in tax credits. Is this not a crazy dependency culture that we have that is holding back productivity?
Thank you for that contribution. Yes, absolutely. Over time, we need to move towards a living wage over time. Clearly, a rush to a living wage too quickly may put jobs under pressure. So over time, in consultation with business, I absolutely believe we should move towards a living wage. We need low and consistent corporation tax, which is what this government is delivering. Government should do not less, not more, and the tax regime should be the same in a year's time and the same in 10 years' time. Of course, we need investment in infrastructure, in roads, in railways and in our broadband. particularly for those in the hardest to reach areas. Local rural businesses want a level playing field for those in urban areas. And we should look at the VAT threshold, £82,000. This is prohibitive in terms of businesses that want to invest but don't want to go over that threshold, won't take new employees on and won't invest in new technology in the fear of having to lose a significant amount of their profits because of the VAT threshold. In conclusion, statistics are important, but they're no substitute for judgment. Our judgment and the judgment of the people of Britain, however you want to look at it, is that things are getting better. This is certainly the most business-friendly government I have ever known. It's done the right things to give business the chance to start, grow, prosper and produce more.
Bill Esterson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, well, I think business would take a rather different view if the members opposite take us out of the EU, as some of them are hell-bent on doing, Madam Deputy Speaker. But can I congratulate the member for Hartsmere and my honourable friend from Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough on excellent maiden speeches, and you on your election to the role, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is the first time I've served under your chairmanship today. Members opposite have talked about difficulties in oil and gas as if that's the only reason for the low productivity in our economy. Well, it's not the only cause. Since the crash, we've seen a weakness in investment in new equipment. We've seen a lack of bank lending, despite the attempts by the Treasury to boost it, or perhaps because of those failed attempts, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've seen problems in infrastructure. We've debated already today the challenges, the difficulties in skills, and all of these have their place in the low productivity and the weak recovery that we've seen alongside the fall in living standards since the crash, of course.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. In addition to that, and affecting small businesses, there's the issue around late payments. Businesses spend hundreds of thousands of hours a year chasing late payments, and the government did little about it in the last Parliament, and I hope they are going to improve their record in this one.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, and certainly the uncertainty in business, which has contributed to the lack of investment and the other problems that I've already touched on, isn't helped, certainly with small and medium-sized businesses, through their treatment by some, I say some, larger businesses in the supply chain. I will give way.
He talks about uncertainty and business, and it's certainly true that business hates uncertainty, and there was a drop-off in business investment in the run-up to the general election, but that was the uncertainty about who was going to be the government and the fear on business that there was going to be a hard-left Labour government in place.
Well, I take it from his intervention that he will be supporting, with every fibre of his being, the Yes campaign to stay in the EU referendum, to minimise the damage that would be done by this country leaving it. And I welcome his conversion to the cause. Now, members opposite have talked about the jobs that were created. Let's be clear, they're created by private businesses, not by the government. They've talked about those jobs that were created under the coalition in the last 5 years, but they've expressed they have shown, I think, a worrying level of complacency when we have seen the weakest recovery since the war, and when productivity has been so low over the last 7 years. It's been 0.5%. It was pointed out that has now gradually started to inch up, and the increase in productivity is, of course, welcome. But I see little evidence in the analysis that we've heard opposite that skills developments are being made with the workers who've been taken on in what predominantly have been low-paid jobs. Certainly in my constituency, a third of people in work now are paid less than a living wage, and that is not a recipe for high living standards or improvements in their day-to-day lives. What we need is that increase in productivity, which will help lead to higher paid jobs, and that comes from skills. It comes from the kinds of investments I've talked about. We heard earlier from another colleague that the scale of the problem with productivity in this country is that output per hour in this country is 17% below the G7 average and 31% below that of the United States. Now, unless that picks up, the sorts of problems that I've already mentioned with the very high number of low paid jobs will continue. We will end up being an economy that relies on low-skill, low-wage employment, and we'll see a continued falling in living standards. Remember that since 2010, people in work, on average, are worse off by £2,000 a year. There is a very, very long way to go to make up that shortfall. Turning to the issue of skills, I want to talk about one particular skill in particular that I think there is strong evidence historically in this country we have really struggled. And it's the skill of management. It's the profession of management. It's the role of managers and leaders in motivating their staff, getting the best out of them, in getting the best out of their organisations, whether in the public or the private sector, and the role that that has to play in raising productivity. 85% of people in a professional occupation have a higher education qualification as a whole. But only 44% of people in management roles have a higher level education qualification. We just do not regard management and leadership in this country as being high quality roles. We don't give them the importance that they deserve. There is not the automatic understanding that management and leadership are skills in their own right, and that leads to a number of problems. So we need to regard them far more highly. Before I came to this place 5 years ago, I used to work in training and development, and we went into a lot of large organisations, and typically the problem was with middle-ranking management. Well, that was the analysis given by senior managers. We often discovered that actually the real problem lay with the senior management and the leadership as well. And that, I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, is a real problem in this country as a whole. Because the importance of having good management and good leadership should not be understated while we're discussing the issue of productivity. Because employee performance is linked to how well they are looked after. Yes, remuneration is important, but often it is the motivation, it's the way they're treated, it's the way that management behaves that is critical too. And my honourable friend behind me uses the right word. Respect is absolutely crucial. So if we want to improve productivity in this country, if we want to compete internationally, we have to look at management as a skill and all of the other factors that other members have mentioned.
Yeah. Before I call the next speaker, can I just say there are so many people wanting to speak, there's so little time that if we don't have interventions, there is an outside chance that everybody will get in. I just want to remind people of that. With that, Julian Knight.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm particularly delighted that I may not be taking an intervention on this, my second speech to this place. I wish to add to my congratulations as well to my honourable friend for Hertsmere and also the honourable member for Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough on their very fine maiden speeches to this place. Productivity is an excellent subject on which to debate, as raising this nation's productivity has been the economic elephant in the room for a generation or more for our country. Why is it that we beat many of our larger continental rivals on measures of economic performance and crucially employment, and while enjoying the benefits of a flexible and vibrant labour market, yet our productivity per worker is lower than that of both France and Germany? And it's good to see the opposition party as well mentioning business, although only seemingly in soundbite form, because I think we often lose sight in this country of a simple fact that every penny that we earn as a country, every job and every sum spent by the public sector on schools and hospitals comes from business ultimately. However, it seems to me that the language used by the Shadow Chancellor in particular within the more and also the more left-leaning press seems to have the air of productivity being the latest economic criticism cab off the rank, this week's crisis of choice. We have had numerous supposed crises talked up by the opposition in recent years. We were apparently cutting too far too fast. Then we had the double dip that now it seems never took place. The domestic energy crisis. Then finally we had the cost of living crisis. But as we know, real incomes are now moving ahead while inflation is at a generation low. All the time, the UK economy was beating expectations. However, it's good that the party opposite have settled on productivity, as this is a far longer-term challenge that we must meet. But the path the party opposite choose to meet this challenge is the wrong one, if the policies of the past few years are anything to go by. More big state, taxing entrepreneurs and wealth creators. This is not a passport to productivity, quite the opposite. In addition, government borrowing matters hugely to to productivity. If you have runaway borrowing, eventually you will have higher interest rates for businesses and individuals, and the debt interest repayments for the government mount up and damage public investment in turn. Our government's first job is to get its finances in order, create certainty for business to invest and individuals to strike out on their own. Where the government can have a key role is through the education system. Young people need many different options when they leave education, and in my constituency, Solihull, the biggest employer, Jaguar Land Rover, is very involved in local schools offering apprenticeships. Universities should be among a suite of options for young people, and I'm delighted the government is moving ahead with its apprenticeship agenda. Another area where the UK can draw a lesson from Jaguar Land Rover is in exporting to the right countries. It was a travesty that when the coalition government came to power in 2010, we traded more with Ireland than with the BRIC nations. And I applaud the Prime Minister's efforts in this area. The truth is, we must look to trade with everyone, as this brings in the outside investment needed, also skills and different perspectives. We've allowed people as well to live in a state of dependency, and welfare has become for far too many a handout rather than a hand-up. Welfare reforms are a crucial means by which to get people economically active, contributing rather than receiving from the state. This raises productivity. And can we never have the statement again, it's the wrong type of job? A regular refrain from members opposite. A job is a job, and from humble starts, superb careers can be built. There is a cultural snobbery factor when it comes to work, and this is something we need to address as a country. All sides need to not only talk the language of business, but genuinely understand that it is a transformative bringer of social good, more so than the state.
Thangam, Debbonaire.
May I congratulate you, Madam Deputy Speaker, on your recent election, and also new honourable members for Hartsmere and for Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough on excellent maiden speeches. But across my constituency, Bristol West, young people are struggling to manage in working conditions which reduce their productivity and blight their futures, as well as costing the economy and the taxpayer. Low-wage, insecure and zero-hours contracts, where an employer binds a worker to them, but with no guarantee of work, are a negative force against productivity. Let me tell the House what life is like. For a young man in Bristol West I met recently, on Monday, he gets up to a text message telling him to turn up for work, but when he gets there, he finds there isn't any. He spent money on bus fare, so he walks home to save the £2 so he can spend something on food. By Friday, this pattern has continued, so he's only had 2 days' work, and he's had to walk home every day. He's tired, he's anxious, he can't save, he doesn't contribute to his local economy beyond paying rent and just buying the bare minimum of food. He daren't speak up. He hasn't got a trade union to represent him because his employer has warned him against doing so. His employer regularly pays late and less than he was expecting. He doesn't get training. He doesn't develop his skills, and therefore he feels no loyalty to his employer. He has no motivation to increase his output. His health, both mental and physical, suffer. He contributes little to the local economy and he barely manages to get by. And we, the taxpayers, are subsidising these practices, these poor employment practices, when we have to chop up low wages. We, the nation, suffer as economic growth remains stagnant or insecure or unstable. In Bristol West, we do have employers who understand this. There are some who do invest in training and skills and don't employ their staff on such low-wage, poor and insecure conditions. If the government wishes productivity to increase, it could start by encouraging, enabling or, if necessary, requiring employers to treat their workforce with respect, to pay them properly and invest in them. They could also invest in the infrastructure that we all need, in order to make sure that employees can arrive at work on time, healthy, educated and decently housed. There should be no need, if the economy is picking up, as the government claims, for any business to resort to zero-hours contracts. If the government does their part and invests in transport, health, housing and education, businesses should do theirs and not rely on the taxpayer to pick up the tab or exploited workers just to accept these poor conditions. It also helps businesses themselves, as my honourable friends, members for Newcastle and Croydon North and others on this side of the House have already explained. I urge the government to ensure that there is investment in infrastructure and in turn highlight those excellent businesses in Bristol West and beyond who do treat their workers properly and don't use zero-hours contracts. In doing so, these businesses who fail to treat their workers with humanity, to encourage these businesses who fail to treat workers with humanity to change their employment practices and to help them to see the business benefits to their own output of doing so, thus increasing worker productivity and thereby sustainable economic growth across the country. Worker productivity is directly affected by the conditions of employment. I urge all businesses and the government to take seriously that we on this side of the House know is true. And many of us have spent our lives campaigning for better conditions in workplaces. I urge the government to end the scourge of exploitative employment practices and in particular 0 hours contracts and insecure pay.
Chris Phil.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow so many excellent maiden speeches and such a passionate contribution from the Honourable Lady from Bristol West. It's also a particular pleasure to contribute, having set up and run my own businesses over the last 15 years, one of which I managed to float on the stock market. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's interesting that the Labour Party chose this particular topic today. It's rather like the dog that didn't bark. If you think about all the things they might have chosen but didn't. They didn't, for example, choose employment. No surprise given it's at record levels. Yeah. They didn't choose unemployment. No surprise given it's the lowest level since 1975. They didn't choose the deficit. No surprise because it's halved. They didn't choose inflation. No surprise because it's zero. And they didn't choose wage growth. Again, no surprise because it's now running at 2%. They did, however, choose this one economic indicator to focus on. But what the Shadow Chancellor, of course, forgot to mention in his speech when he reeled off the recent figures was the productivity figure from the last year Labour were in office, 2009, when in fact productivity dropped by 2.6%, a far bigger drop than any year in the last Parliament. However, it is fair to say that using international comparisons, there are opportunities for improvement. And I think a look at different sectors is instructive. As my right honourable friend from Wokingham has pointed out already, the oil and gas and finance sectors have both declined somewhat in the last few years for reasons that he explained, and they were amongst the most productive sectors. There are, however, a number of areas we can learn from, most conspicuously the automotive and aeronautical manufacturing industry, where productivity in the last 6 years has grown by a staggering 56%. And in fact, a British worker now manufactures on average 11.5 cars per year, up from just 9.3 5 years ago, an impressive improvement. Madam Deputy Speaker, the IFS and the Bank of England have both published some interesting reports in this area, and I sincerely recommend or commend them to fellow members. They mention as a general, not specific to the UK, but a general cause of declining productivity, a lack of accessibility to capital to invest in better plant and machinery, combined with cheap labour, which tempts firms to rather lazily hire cheap labour rather than invest in machinery or in technology. I'm very pleased that the government in the last 5 years has taken action on both of those areas, most recently by raising the minimum wage by 3%, the highest increase since 2008, and by encouraging banks to lend more. And I very much hope the government in the next 5 years will continue to increase the minimum wage and will continue to encourage banks to lend more to operating businesses. I believe both of those things will help address the productivity issues raised today. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are a number of other areas where the government has taken extremely compelling action, not least in reducing energy costs, not least in rolling out broadband, not least in deregulating, reducing regulations, £10 billion in the last Parliament, the same again this year, and reducing corporation tax to just 20%, the lowest level in the G7. It is no wonder, given those things, we're growing so strongly. It's no wonder that wages are now growing by 2% per year, which in my view is a leading indicator for productivity increases. I'm delighted to be supporting the government's record and look forward to it continuing for the next 5 years.
Alan Mack. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I begin by congratulating the honourable member for Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough, my honourable friend, the member for Hartsmere, on their wonderful maiden speeches. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak in today's debate about productivity. The central issue is how we as a government can help our people fulfil their potential and how we can unleash Britain's core strengths as a nation: hard work, aspiration and creativity. That is what productivity means in reality, a commitment to helping hard-working people get on in life, and that's what this government has been doing. Members opposite are right to say that productivity is key to living standards in our public finances, but they're wrong to suggest that it is all doom and gloom. Mr Speaker, productivity rose last year after plummeting during Labour's recession. Recession caused the biggest fall in living standards for a generation. That recession meant banks stopped lending to our businesses, and that recession led to the biggest drop in productivity since 1974. Incidentally, when the last Labour government gave us the 3-day week, it is this government, Mr Speaker, that has been clearing up that mess. To coin a phrase, we are the government that's been fixing the roof while the sun has been shining. Because over the last 5 years, I'll make progress. Over the last 5 years, and in government alone, we've taken action in 3 areas which all sides of the House should welcome. Firstly, we're rebalancing the economy geographically so that wealth, opportunity and productivity are spread more evenly across the country. In 2013, for example, London enjoyed 29% higher productivity than the UK average, and that's why we're supporting other regions to get ahead and stay ahead. It's why the Chancellor's launched the Northern Powerhouse to connect up our great cities in the north. With a population of 15 million, a great industrial and manufacturing heritage, and a strong reputation for science and technology, there's a big foundation for the Northern Powerhouse to build on. And Mr Speaker, foreign investors also have confidence in the Northern Powerhouse concept. We've seen massive investment all over the north. Hitachi, Nissan, Rolls-Royce in the north east, the airport city in Manchester, the new deep water port in Liverpool, Siemens in Hull and East Yorkshire. These are the strong foundations upon which the Northern Powerhouse is built. Secondly, we're rebalancing the economy by sector, supporting manufacturing, science and technology, not just relying on financial services. We must, of course, champion our financial services sector across the entire UK. It's a world leader and a big source of tax revenue. But as we saw under the last Labour government, we have to have a better and more broad-based economy that has to have high-quality manufacturing, technology and science at its heart. And that's why, for example, this government created the Catapult Centres, a network of world-leading centres to transform the UK's innovation and productivity in 7 specific areas, including manufacturing and cell therapy. And finally, we're cutting red tape in businesses, reducing the burdens on hard-working people. In my constituency of Havant, for example, manufacturing and engineering businesses like Colt, Eaton Aerospace and Pfizer are benefiting from the most competitive rate of corporation tax in the G7, allowing them to train apprentices, to export, to innovate and to boost productivity. And through the red tape challenge, we've removed or amended over 3,000 regulations. And of course, we've cut taxes on hard-working people, allowing them to keep more of the money they earn, the best possible incentive to boost productivity. Mr Speaker, may I conclude by also commending the government on its appointment of the Noble Lord O'Neill of Gatley as the new Commercial Secretary to the Treasury. I heartily recommend his maiden speech, which focuses on productivity, having engaged with him in his lordship on a number of initiatives in the city to bring to this country best practice from fast-growing economies like China. I know he will bring a huge amount of experience to this debate. Mr Speaker, this is a government committed to our economic recovery with a long-term economic plan that has already ensured Britain is the fastest-growing economy in the Western world. I look forward to the publication of the government's productivity plan, which I know will set forward further steps to strengthen our economy and boost productivity in the years to come.
Suella Fernandez.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Improving the productivity of our country is the key to raising standards for everyone, and our future prospects depend on it. And whilst I welcome this debate on productivity, I must say that the context of the productivity puzzle cannot be ignored. There is no doubt that the last 5 years have seen record levels of employment, with 2 million more people in work. And in my constituency of Fareham, local employers like Luckett's Travel and Eaton Aerospace are contributing to the local economy through more jobs, more apprentices and increases in wage rate. Pay is now rising at its fastest rate since the economic crisis. But we need to be measured in our analysis, and I echo the comments made by my right honourable friend, member for Wokingham, in his analysis of the causes of the productivity puzzle. It's no coincidence that the productivity challenge happened roughly, or the collapse happened roughly at the same time as the financial crash itself, leading to a sudden shrinkage in the financial sector. And the decline in North Sea oil output in recent years is another contributory factor to the fall in productivity. And that's the context of our productivity challenge. The solution, however, is at the heart of this government's agenda. Firstly, the massive investment in infrastructure will hugely contribute to productivity, whether it's the £1.4 billion package of 18 new road schemes in South East England, improving the A27 corridor, which runs through my constituency of Fareham, or the work to Junction 10 of the M27. We are witnessing the boldest and most far-reaching roads programme for decades, which will unlock economic potential in the region. Or whether it's a £7 million government investment in the Solent Enterprise Zone, just over the border in my neighbouring constituency of Gosport, for which I congratulate the Right Honourable Friend, the member for Gosport, on her efforts to get more investment from government. We are seeing there last year the opening of the Centre for Excellence in Manufacturing, Engineering and Advanced Skills, where hundreds more young people will be trained in technical and vocational skills. Or whether it's the reform to our tax regimes, to corporation tax, to the jobs tax and to business rates, hundreds of thousands of small businesses can now operate more efficiently. Mr. Speaker, this investment, this package of reforms and the tax changes put enterprise, jobs and aspiration at the heart of our work in government, so that productivity will increase and brand Britain will continue to thrive.
Mr. Robert Jenrick. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And can I also congratulate new members on their excellent maiden speeches? And can I welcome my Nottinghamshire neighbour to his role as Shadow Chancellor? He is, of course, the third Nottingham man in recent times to hold the position, although, of course, only the member for Rushcliffe ever got the top job. I'm sure if he needs any friendly advice on how to run a successful economy, our neighbour would be happy to give it. That productivity continues to grow in prominence is, as has already been said throughout the debate, a recognition of the remarkable achievement over the last few years on employment. Almost 9,000 new jobs have been created in my own constituency since 2010, and that we now have a credible long-term plan for the public finances, respected by the markets, and that we need to continue delivering on. But it is also an acceptance by all of us that the country is running up against the limits of what can be achieved by boosting employment alone. We are well on the way to becoming a country of people in work, but the task for the next 5 years is how we can become a country of people who are well paid. So much has been said already, but let me turn to one area in particular. The truth is that the UK has never quite managed to develop the kind of entrepreneurial culture equivalent to that in the US. Governments don't create entrepreneurs or the businessmen and women of the future, but they can and must be the flag bearers for them. Margaret Thatcher was undoubtedly the outstanding champion of British enterprise of the last 30 years. We need to reawaken the spirit of those times, albeit in contemporary language, and I am certain that the Treasury front bench will do so. I had the great pleasure a few days ago of going to the theatre in Newark to a play at the excellent Palace Theatre called Arcadia. And there is a line in that play that stuck with me, and that is where one of the characters turns to another and says, "This is the greatest time to be alive because everything we thought we knew is wrong." And I think that is a line that we should all remember. With the internet upending old industries, with the shift in power from the west to the east, new opportunities out there if only we and our generation can seize them, with a new, spirited, entrepreneurial culture. How might we do that? Pivot towards the growth of those emerging markets and away from stagnant economies, mostly in Europe. That means new free trade agreements with China. It means avoiding the caricature of TTIP. It means using the FCO and the Commonwealth Network, as we have done in the last Parliament, not complaining, as some on the other side do, of mercantilism in the FCO, as if trade were a dirty word. The UK should become a hub of the IT sector in Europe. It has the best universities. It has the venture capital industry, if only we have the ambition to realise it. Use our universities. The Catapult initiative we've heard of already has been and will be excellent. Have the confidence to allow enterprise to have its rewards, where genuine wealth creators can reap the benefits of their success, not be ashamed of it. Be on the side of the insurgent, not the vested interests. Tackle the Big Six. Break up BT Openreach. Back insurgents, not the establishment. Generations of Treasury ministers have had supply side written on their political gravestones. I am certain the Chancellor and the Chief Secretary will be remembered as the entrepreneurs' champions. What better epithet, Mr. Speaker? Inspire a generation to succeed, to prosper and to excel, as all Conservative governments have done in the past.
Order. As the House will know, the ballot for electing chairs of select committees closed at 5 p.m. Counting has been underway since then. I had, of course, hoped that it might be possible to declare the results to the House at 7:15 p.m. this evening, in contrast to the arrangement 5 years ago, that is to say, before the adjournment. Sadly, I have to tell the House that that will not be possible. I therefore intend to announce the results after questions tomorrow morning at around 10:30 a.m. I'm advised, and I'm glad, that there will be no, repeat, no, prior publication. Shabana Mahmood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is a pleasure to close this debate on behalf of the opposition and to support our motion before the House this evening. We have had a good debate with some thoughtful speeches, and I particularly want to mention the speeches of my honourable friends, the members for Hartlepool, for Newcastle upon Tyne Central, Croydon North, Sefton Central and Bristol West. And may I also congratulate the honourable members who made their maiden speeches today, the members for Hertsmere, or indeed Albert Square, and the member for Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough, who I thought made a very moving tribute to his predecessor, David Blunkett, and also his constituency too. May I welcome them both to this House. I wish them well as they use the power of their voices in this place to speak on behalf of their constituents and pursue the causes that matter to them. And one such cause, Mr. Speaker, and central issue of the day, on which I hope that there is consensus in this House, is productivity, the subject of our debate this evening, and the impact of productivity on the performance of our economy. Mr. Speaker, this is the central economic challenge facing the government, and I believe getting this right is vital if we are to achieve higher living standards, sustained GDP growth and effective deficit reduction. We believe that we must seek to maximise output from the efforts of working people. If workers can produce more, their employers can pay more, tax revenues can be more buoyant, and GDP growth stronger and more sustainable. In short, Mr. Speaker, if we get this right, then everyone can be a winner. Governments can make choices to pull the levers at their disposal when it comes to the national minimum wage, or indeed even the living wage, but when it comes to wider wage growth across the rest of the economy, and for those on middle incomes, then higher productivity is the way forward, as the CBI and indeed the Bank of England have both also emphasised. And in this House, we should all agree that GDP growth that is driven just by increasing the number of people and how many hours they work will not make people better off. And as a nation, rather than settling for the current state of things, we should aspire to have more for us all, to be better and to be stronger. We should have a broader vision and ambition for everyone in our country, in particular those who are currently stuck in low-pay work. So what has been happening to productivity on this government's watch? Well, 7 years on from the global financial crisis, and I think some members opposite appear to have forgotten that there was a global financial crisis in the late, before the last Labour government left power, productivity is still 1.7% below the pre-crisis peak. Between 2010 and 2014, productivity has grown by an average of just 0.4% a year. In Q4 of 2014, productivity growth fell by 0.2% compared to the previous quarter, and productivity growth was also negative in 2013 and 2012, minus 0.3% and minus 1.2% respectively. UK output per hour is now 17 percentage points below the G7 average and 31 percentage points below the United States of America. The OBR say that productivity growth is, and I quote, the most important and uncertain part of their economic forecast. The ONS say say that the stagnation of productivity is, and I quote, unprecedented, and the Bank of England say this is one of their main concerns about the nature of the recovery going forward. Now, one response to this productivity puzzle would be to think that this is just how things are, that this is a necessary and inevitable consequence of a changing world. But it doesn't have to be this way, and we should not settle for things being this way. And despite the post-election pronouncements about a soon-to-be-announced so-called productivity plan, with respect, the government's inaction and ineffectiveness on this issue over their previous 5 years in government suggests that they have been content to settle for things exactly as they are. How else can the Chancellor explain his complete failure to even mention productivity during his March budget speech, or his failure to prioritise productivity growth over the previous 5 years? But he and his team can listen this evening and start to put things right as they look ahead to the July budget. The Chancellor has choices to make ahead of the first fiscal event of this Parliament, and he should make choices that will boost productivity. He could focus on skills and innovation. We've heard today that jobs growth has been disproportionately focused on lower skilled work since mid-2013, and we have a persistent trend of insecurity in the labour market and, as is therefore inevitable, weak wage growth too. And the government is wrong to sit back and watch this happen, because our labour market is changing and the jobs of tomorrow will look very different to the jobs of 20 years ago. Indeed, the jobs that our children will be doing in the future probably haven't even been invented yet. Our future workforce is also changing. It's ageing. There are more women and there are increasing numbers of people with high-level qualifications. With so much talent to harness on this side of the House, we believe public spending should focus on enhancing investment, skills and innovation. Those opposite have failed thus far to provide any real solutions or strategies to build the productive, high-skilled, high-waged workforce that this country needs, and this must urgently change. And on infrastructure, frankly, we on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, have already done the heavy lifting with the report that we commissioned by Sir John Armitt, whose proposal, accepted in full by us, for a National Infrastructure Commission is one that this government should also adopt. Indeed, we have even prepared the draft legislation. With all of the work done, Mr. Speaker, and given that it's in the national interest, I do say to the Treasury front bench they can have that one for free and they should get ahead and do it. And it should also listen, the Chancellor should also listen to us, Mr. Speaker, and allow the OBR to publish an assessment of how the likely options for the spending review due later this year are going to impact on productivity. I know we have asked the Chancellor on a number of occasions to allow the IBR to do a number of things, such as auditing party manifestos ahead of the general election, or allowing them to prepare reports to inform the EU referendum debate. And unfortunately, the Chancellor has never taken the opportunity to listen to us before. But it is important that we have a wider understanding of the big and difficult choices that will be made on public spending. And frankly, the Chancellor should not run away or hide away from having some light shed on the consequences of the different choices open to him, or indeed the scrutiny that will come once he has made those choices. Mr. Speaker, with no clear plan to boost productivity over the past 5 years, no significant drive for the skills that are needed for good, high-wage jobs in our economy, no National Infrastructure Commission, and no long-term funding framework for science, and only now plans for a plan in July, the Chancellor is coming late to this particular party. But if he is going to show up, and I'm afraid to say that today's no-show doesn't make one feel confident about that, but if he is going to show up, then he needs to make it count. And those opposite, Mr. Speaker, could help him on his way by supporting our motion and voting in favour of it this evening.
Call the Minister, Damien Hines, to
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Solving the productivity puzzle is a vital component of the journey we've been on since 2010, the journey to long-term prosperity through a comprehensive long-term economic plan. In 2010, this country urgently needed financial stability. We provided it. We needed to get public spending under control. We did so. We needed job creation, because that's the best way to help people support their families. And 2 million jobs were created, 1,000 a day. Rebuilding an economy does take time. it is a long journey, and we've always known that improving productivity is a key and central part of that journey. Our productivity plan, which the Chancellor announced last month, will set out how we further develop that. 45 years ago, when I was born, UK output per hour was 37% below that of the United States, significantly bigger, in fact, than the gap today. Now, what happened 45 years ago is of limited significance and, I suspect, interest to anybody sitting here right now. But it does somewhat highlight the partial picture of the words in this motion today, that UK productivity has been an issue for several years. Mr. Speaker, it has been an issue for several decades. And ever since we returned to government in 2010, productivity growth has been central to our mission of sustainably rebuilding the economy. In 2010, our overarching priority had to be keeping people in jobs while we set about the task of returning to fiscal balance. And I will make no apology, Mr. Speaker, for that. But at the same time as pulling us back from the financial brink, we were also bringing in key supply-side reforms to boost efficiency and productivity. We created a national infrastructure plan, and as a result, infrastructure investment was 15% higher in the last Parliament than in the previous one. On road, on rail, and with online, thousands of infrastructure projects are connecting people and communities. Our support for science and innovation has increased our competitive advantage by focusing on the UK's great areas of strength. Mr. Speaker, even as we had to trim departmental budgets right across the board, we protected science. We helped our universities get on a firm financial footing to maintain their world-class position as centres of excellence. And to rebalance the economy, we put together a radical programme for growth outside of London and the South East, combining investment and devolution. All of this has helped deliver jobs and growth. And last year, we saw productivity begin to rise. The OBR expects productivity growth of 0.9% this year, and after this, it grows at 2% or above in every year of the forecast period. Mr. Speaker, we are now ready for the next step. Our productivity plan, as the Chancellor announced on May 20th, will explain how we will shift our economy up a gear. It will be ambitious, it will be long-term, and it will be wide-ranging. Our manifesto is a programme for long-term sustainable growth. £100 billion of infrastructure this Parliament, as well as the big infrastructure questions for the decades ahead. Skills for the long term at every stage of people's education and career. A better balanced Britain. And not just a northern powerhouse, because as I'm sure other members will agree, there should be no monopoly on powerhouses. We will deliver the affordable houses that people need. We will cut red tape. We will help businesses access finance. And we will maximise workforce participation, including among parents who want to return to work, to give them the support to do so. This and much, much more. A blueprint for a more powerful, for a more productive Britain. Mr. Speaker, today we've had some very interesting and powerful speeches from a number of honourable and right honourable members, many drawing on their own business experience. The two speeches that we heard that were maiden speeches I thought were particularly outstanding today, starting with my honourable friend, the member for Hertsmere. As expected, a highly erudite maiden speech from the former Deputy Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister. He reminded us of the rich lineage he has in his constituency predecessors, and I am sure he is going to make an extremely admirable addition to that line. And the maker of the other maiden speech today, the honourable gentleman, the member for Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough, he too knows what it is to have big shoes standing in front of him to step into, in the shape of David Blunkett, who has such respect right across this House, and he follows in his footsteps from local government into this place. He put EU renegotiation onto a very interesting, long, historical context, but also in terms of today's topic for debate, he rightly put it in its proper context, the context of productivity being there in order to raise living standards and spread prosperity. There were a number of other interesting and important speeches. My right honourable friend, the member for Wokingham, reminded us of the sectoral shift that has been going on and the maturity of the UK continental shelf and the fall of the oil price and what that has done to the North Sea oil sector, as well as the shift away from financial services. My friend, the member for Bexhill and Battle, reminded us of his own lack of productivity when challenging Madam Deputy Speaker electorally in North Derbyshire, but also of the full sets of contrast between this country and France, and we should be careful of the ones that we seek to follow. My honourable friend for Yeovil talked about the importance of services as well as manufacturing in productivity growth. The honourable member for Thirsk and Malton talked about the importance of cutting red tape. My honourable friend, the member for Solihull, welcomed employer involvement with schools in building skills. And my honourable friend, the member for Croydon South, talked about all the things that Labour did not choose to call today's debate on, which is just as instructive as what they did. There were also excellent speeches from my near neighbours, the honourable members for Havant and for Fareham, and from our honourable friend from Newark. Two opposition members I wanted to mention, in particular the honourable member for Hartlepool, talked rightly about the success stories of the automotive and aerospace sectors and the importance of R&D spend. He asked specifically about the government's industrial strategy. I would say to him that the entire programme of government of this government is an industrial strategy. It is something integrated with what we do, not something we add on. And of course we stay in constant contact with industry. And the honourable member, the gentleman from Sefton, talked about his own experience in training and development and the key role of management quality that it plays in productivity, and he is quite right. And I just wanted to remind him that now, of course, our postgraduate loans are going to be available to MBA students as well. More broadly, in terms of skills building, we have a very ambitious programme to deliver 3 million quality apprenticeships, and to date there are 50 higher apprenticeships available up to degree and master's level. Last year there was a 40% increase in the number of people participating in higher apprenticeships. I won't give way because I'm coming close to the end and time is short. Mr. Speaker, go on then.
I'd like to thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. Can you confirm how many of those 3 million quality apprenticeships will be conversions from other programmes?
I would say to the honourable gentleman, we have a track record in the last Parliament of delivering 2.2 million quality apprenticeships. We're going to carry on delivering that. That's an important investment in the young people of this country and a very important investment in our industrial future. Mr. Speaker, the reforms of the last 5 years have delivered more jobs, they've delivered more growth, and they've delivered more security for the people of our country. We now have a chance to take things to the next level through our bold and ambitious productivity plan. We have the track record on making the right economic decisions, a record, I am glad to say, which the British people strongly endorsed 5 weeks ago. There is a real ambition to get that step change that our country needs in productivity. Our cities want it, our businesses want it, the people of this country want it, and Mr. Speaker, with them, we will make it happen.
Order. The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of their opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. Division. Clear the lobby. Order. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as other have been say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Nick Dakin and Susan Ellen Jones. Tellers for the noes, Jackie Doyle Price and Guy Opperman. Order.
The ayes to the right, 260. The noes to the left, 320.
The ayes to the right, 260. The noes to the left, 320. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock. Petition. Mr. Keith Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to present a petition about a...
Order. Just before the Right Honourable Gentleman for Leicester East speaks to his petition, can I say to members who unaccountably are leaving the chamber and therefore not hearing of its contents and not staying to hear the adjournment debate, which is at least as unaccountable, perhaps if they'd be good enough to leave the chamber quietly, that would be appreciated. We still have, I say to colleagues, 2 parliamentary delights this evening, and it's good to know that some members at least have stayed for those 2 delights. Petition, Mr. Keith Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is the first time I've been called a delight, and I'm most grateful. I wish to present a petition based on a local initiative signed by 362 local residents, a petition collected by local parents and residents, and I want to thank my 3 local councillors in the ward, Councillor Dipak Bajaj, Ratad Al Govind and Sue Hunter, for raising awareness of this issue. This concerns the safety of pupils as they cross Spencefield Lane, opposite the St Paul's Catholic School and the Krishna Avanti Hindu Primary School. At the moment, the road is very dangerous, and the residents and local parents and the school children wish to have a petition. So the petition of residents of Leicester East declares that road safety has become a serious concern on Spencefield Lane, further notes that parents, teachers and local residents fear that inadequate pedestrian crossings and road safety measures risk the safety of school children and vulnerable adults who cross the road each day, and further that a local petition on this issue was signed by 362 individuals. The petitioners therefore urge the House of Commons to request Leicester City Council to implement measures to improve road safety on Spencefield Lane, including a pedestrian crossing, without further delay.
Petition, road safety on Spencefield Lane, Leicester.